Thanksgiving is a traditional family holiday. During this time, multiple generations gather around a festive table in the home of the elders. Each person present is expected to express gratitude for the blessings of the past year and to show love and respect for their relatives. This is how it goes for most families. However, there are those who disregard these established customs. In such relationships, things often leave much to be desired, and even significant dates hold little meaning. For domestic violence, there are no restraining factors. The boundaries of what is acceptable have long been broken. This is a new story about the horrific events that took place in one American family on the eve of a national holiday. Call for help. On November 23, 2006, at 3:46 p.m., a call was made to the Memphis, Tennessee Emergency Services. It's understood that misfortunes don't take holidays or weekends, so it can't be said that the atmosphere at 911 was relaxed. However, the dispatcher who took the call was in shock, as he later admitted to a colleague. What startled the operator was the absolute calmness of the caller, as if he wasn't asking for help but placing a breakfast order. The man identified himself as Jeffrey Scott and reported that his wife had been unconscious since 11 a.m. At the same time, a voice in the background corrected him, saying that the woman was most likely dead. When the dispatcher asked for clarification, Scott stated, "She was breathing a second ago and now she's dead." His voice didn't waver. Information about a possible crime was immediately relayed to the rescue service leadership, and a specialized team was dispatched to the scene. The victim. Law enforcement arrived at the address within minutes. They were met by the homeowner, who led them to the bedroom where his wife, Ashley Scott, lay. Upon entering the room, they saw someone bending over her, performing CPR. The man introduced himself as Dr. Robert McGee, a friend of Jeffrey. He said the woman was still alive, but on the brink of death. Her pulse was barely detectable, and her blood pressure was dangerously low. Medics examined the woman and agreed with his assessment. They suspected that she had sustained a head injury from a blunt object and was close to death. Her pupils were dilated and unresponsive to light, and blood was coming from her mouth and nose. Additionally, Ashley's body showed signs of trauma. Her legs, chest, and back bore numerous bruises and abrasions. The medical team attempted emergency resuscitation. They intubated her, used a defibrillator, and administered heart-stimulating drugs, but none of it helped. The young woman was dying before their eyes. In the end, she was rushed to the hospital. A neurosurgeon was called to assess her condition in the emergency department. His diagnosis was grim and confirmed his colleagues' opinions. The 28-year-old woman was in a critical state, at the final stage of brain death. There was nothing that could be done to help her. Her body systems and vital organs were shutting down. As a result, it was decided not to prolong the patient's suffering and to disconnect her from life support. She passed away shortly after. There was no doubt that Ashley had been brutally deprived of life. Her right ear was green, a color typical of those who box and take repeated blows to the same spot. Additionally, a man's shoe print was visible on her back. It seemed as though someone had trampled, if not jumped, on her. Her fragile body was covered in bruises at various stages of healing, indicating that she had been subjected to periodic violence. Family doctor. While doctors fought for the life of a young and beautiful woman, police officers were questioning McGee and Scott. The doctor explained that he was the one who insisted on calling emergency services and shared what he knew. At 2:30 p.m., Jeffrey, his friend, called him. The men had met during their college years and occasionally kept in touch. Over the phone, Jeffrey mentioned that he had been drinking with his wife the night before, and afterward she felt unwell. She went to bed, but never woke up. He then decided to seek professional help. At the time, the doctor was busy but postponed his duties and arrived at the couple's home. There, he found Jeffrey next to his wife, who showed no signs of life. The doctor suspected that the couple had quarreled and something unfortunate had occurred, which they wanted to keep quiet about. That's why they contacted him. He knew that the couple had been going through tough times recently. Each reacted differently. Ashley drank, and Jeffrey was quick to anger and often raised his hand against her. When the doctor examined Ashley, he realized that the situation was far more severe than he had initially thought. There was no chance of survival, and the poor woman needed immediate medical attention. He insisted that Jeffrey call 911. At the same time, Robert pieced together the situation in his mind. He understood that something much more serious had happened, possibly a premeditated crime. He admitted to the police that he had deliberately delayed Scott at the scene to prevent him from fleeing. Jeffrey's lies. Throughout this, Jeffrey remained utterly emotionless. It seemed as though he had no concern for the future of the woman he once loved. When asked by the police what had happened, he explained that the previous evening they had argued. The reason was the discovery of Ashley's messages with another man. He believed his wife was cheating on him. Unable to bear the betrayal, he struck her, but only once. After that, she stumbled and fell, as she was heavily intoxicated. Jeffrey noted that his wife frequently abused alcohol and behaved irrationally. He didn't want to tolerate her outbursts anymore and kicked her out of the house. In such instances, she would usually sleep in the garage. In the morning, he found his wife there, still asleep. Feeling pity, Jeffrey carried her into the house and laid her on the bed. Time passed, but she didn't wake up. That's when he realized something was wrong and tried to revive her himself. Then he contacted his doctor friend and called him to the house. However, the police didn't believe his story. When they arrived, the woman was covered in bruises from head to toe. She was bleeding, with her face and head battered. Even if she had been drunk and fallen, she wouldn't have caused such injuries to herself. It was clear she had been beaten. Scott was arrested and charged with aggravated assault. As soon as the autopsy results came in, the charge was upgraded to first-degree crime. Autopsy results. The pathologist's report was chilling. The cause of Ashley Scott's death was a subdural hematoma on the right side of her brain. Such injuries are caused by a severe blow to the head. Her brain essentially slammed against her skull, leading to massive bleeding and swelling, cutting off the oxygen supply. This caused her body systems and organs to begin failing. It's an excruciating process. What's even more tragic is that she could have been saved if help had been provided in time, preferably within the first few hours. Additionally, more than 50 hematomas were found on her body. They varied in color and density, confirming the medic's statements that the woman had been repeatedly assaulted. It was hard to imagine the torment Ashley had endured over time. The most horrifying aspect was that the person who inflicted this suffering was the one who was supposed to protect her. Evidence. After Jeffrey's arrest, detectives began examining the crime scene. Signs of a struggle were found throughout the house. Items were scattered everywhere, and furniture was overturned. A broken vase lay in the living room. On the kitchen table, near a laptop, were printed messages between Ashley and her lover, confirming the suspect's claims about the motive for the crime. Upon closer inspection of the garage, officers found bloodstains on the floor. Inside Mrs. Scott's car were women's clothes and other personal items. There was also a handbag containing her documents and passport. It appeared that the deceased had planned to escape, but she didn't make it. Officers then decided to speak with the family's relatives and friends, which revealed unexpected details about their lives and circumstances, shedding light on the incident. Unfortunately, it happens that women fall in love with the wrong men and tie their lives to them. Initially, everything seems bright and promising, but soon the object of their affection turns into a dreadful tyrant, and life with them becomes a nightmare. The victim of both emotional and physical abuse loses their sense of reality and may even justify the abuser's actions. In these cases, outside psychological help is needed, as the victim is often unable to help themselves or escape the situation. The kind soul of Ashley Pittman. Ashley Scott, née Pittman, was born on November 4, 1978, in Bossier City, Louisiana. Her parents separated while she was still in her mother's womb. However, fate smiled upon Donna, and she met Jimmy Pittman, whom she later married. Jimmy adopted Ashley and loved her from the moment she was born. Notably, Jimmy already had a 5-year-old daughter named Kika. Unfortunately, Jimmy and Donna's marriage didn't last long, and they divorced a few years later. It's important to note that Donna left the family herself and eventually remarried. Ashley chose to stay with her father but continued to see her mother. Despite her parents' divorce, Ashley had a good childhood. She grew up kind and obedient. Everyone around her considered her a true beauty and predicted a bright future for her. In 1996, she graduated from high school and then enrolled at Ouachita Baptist University in Arkansas. It was there that she met her first love. Jeffrey Scott had attended the same school as her and, by a stroke of fate, enrolled at the same university. Jeffrey also noticed the beautiful girl with a radiant smile, and before long, they started dating. The young couple seemed perfect, always together and holding hands. Ashley's friends envied her, believing she had found a reliable partner. Ashley fueled their curiosity by sharing how sweet and kind he was and how lucky she felt to have him. In 2000, Pittman received her long-awaited degree in education. Now, her childhood dream was about to come true. She wanted to become a teacher and dedicate her life to children. Unhappy celebrations. Finally, on June 9, 2001, Ashley and Jeffrey got married. However, things didn't go as they had appeared in her girlhood dreams. Unexpectedly for everyone, a dark side of her chosen one came to light. To be more precise, it became noticeable to others, although the bride herself had known about it but chose to ignore it. A year before the wedding, Ashley sent a letter to her sister, Kika, stating that she could no longer communicate with them, but they should respect her decision. Naturally, her family wasn't invited to the wedding either. Friends of Ashley, who had the fortune to attend the ceremony, were shocked. The overwhelming majority of guests were from the groom's side, while Ashley had a large, close-knit family. This struck them as odd. However, they later understood why. The reason was that her family did not share her views on Jeffrey, and he made no effort to change their minds. Behind the seemingly nice guy lurked something sinister. He frequently spoke ill of her family and behaved inappropriately. He offended those close to her and felt justified in doing so. What was most surprising was her reaction. It was as if Ashley was making excuses for him. During the wedding, Jeffrey once again insulted some of her friends and acted arrogantly. Eventually, when the newlyweds moved to Cordova, a suburb of Memphis, Tennessee, her relationships with many people deteriorated. Those who didn't turn away from her continued to stay in touch, but kept their distance. The dark side of Jeffrey Scott. After the move, the head of the family started working as a computer systems technician at his father's company, while the newly minted Mrs. Scott became an English teacher at a middle school. Everyone spoke highly of her. Ashley was considered beautiful and cheerful, intelligent and sociable. She loved her job and her students. Later, Paul Dooley described his colleague as a skilled specialist and talented educator. She was the main reason to get up in the morning and go to English class, he shared. In court, he admitted that the school was the only place where she felt safe and loved. The educational institution became a refuge where Jeffrey Scott couldn't reach her. Indeed, as time passed, the relationship between the spouses worsened. Ashley's connection with her family nearly broke. She didn't want to discuss it and called the situation her personal choice. Without a doubt, these conclusions were made under the influence of a master manipulator. Her husband was precisely that. In the early years, he completely dominated her and cut her off from outside support. Daily criticisms for every little thing lowered her self-esteem. Scott suppressed his wife in any way he could. During this period, she communicated with only a few people. Among them was her childhood friend, Lori. The girls had been friends since 5th grade and maintained contact into adulthood. Reunion evening. In September 2006, a high school reunion was planned for the school where Ashley studied. She was eager to attend, and despite her husband's reluctance, she went to the event. Those present didn't notice any significant changes in her. However, Lori was concerned. Throughout the evening, Jeffrey constantly called his wife, not allowing her to relax and enjoy herself. He asked whom she was talking to, what she was wearing, what she was eating and drinking, and what she was discussing. In short, he tried to control every minute of her life. That evening, Ashley confessed to Lori the nightmare she was living in and said she couldn't go on like this. She revealed that she was considering divorce and had even contacted a divorce attorney. She also admitted that she knew about her husband's repeated infidelities. She mentioned, for example, an affair with a colleague named Blair Brown, with whom she had once gotten along well. However, she noted that over time, she forgave her acquaintance. Blair had reached out to her to share who Jeffrey really was and how dangerous he could be. It should be noted that this party was the last in the young woman's life. After that, she didn't speak to anyone for several weeks, and new bruises appeared on her body. Lori's testimony. Detectives became interested in the stories shared by Ashley's relatives and friends. Through conversations with them, they gathered a lot of valuable information. Lori also revealed that shortly before Ashley's death, Jeffrey had called her several times to complain about his wife. He claimed that she drank heavily, lost her balance, and often fell, which explained why she was covered in bruises. However, the next morning, Ashley wouldn't remember these events and would blame him. He attributed her growing alcohol dependency to their mutual acquaintance, Blair, claiming that she had corrupted Ashley and turned her against him. He also mentioned that he no longer wanted to have children because he felt disgusted with his wife after everything that had happened. Scott accused his wife of constant infidelity, lying, and alcoholism. However, Lori didn't believe any of this and thought he was trying to justify himself. Eventually, Lori realized that Ashley had become a victim of domestic violence and was in serious trouble. After each of these calls, she would try to call her friend back, but Ashley wouldn't pick up, which was very strange. The last time they saw each other was shortly before the tragic events. The friends went shopping, but Ashley didn't buy anything for herself. She was sad and pensive. Lori tried to talk to her about her marriage, but Ashley said she didn't want to ruin the evening and changed the subject. The only thing she mentioned about the impending divorce was that she was ready to take that step but was very afraid. She knew Jeffrey well and feared his reaction could be completely unpredictable. Blair's testimony. Next, Blair Brown, whose name frequently came up in the Scott family, was called in for questioning. She admitted that she had indeed been Jeffrey's lover in the past. Therefore, she knew firsthand about his uncontrollable fits of rage. It was established that the friendship between the two women was rekindled about 6 months before the crime. Blair felt sympathy for her and provided occasional support. She also admitted that her relationship with Jeffrey was a mistake and apologized repeatedly for it. The women sometimes met and had drinks together. Ashley would often hide at Blair's place to get away from Jeffrey. One day, he tracked her down and came for her. At that moment, Blair witnessed a brutal attack. Scott struck his wife several times in the face and threw her out onto the street, completely unfazed by the presence of a witness. Even after these events, Ashley downplayed his guilt and made excuses for him. The accused. During another interrogation, Scott admitted that he contacted Robert McGee only 15 hours after the argument. All that time, his wife had been unconscious, alone in the garage. Jeffrey continued to insist that he had only struck her once because of the discovered infidelity. After that, he sent her to the garage, brought bedding, and threw it on the floor. The bleeding woman was left to spend her last hours freezing and suffering in pain, while her husband rested comfortably in the house. However, the autopsy results did not support his claims. It was clear that he had always treated his wife poorly. Additionally, detectives learned that Jeffrey occasionally used the services of escorts, even when Ashley was at the reunion. Despite this, he blamed her for all their problems. Indeed, shortly before she decided to file for divorce, Ashley met a young man named Michael Lowe. They exchanged messages from October 29th to November 22nd, 2006. He was the one who encouraged her to leave her husband, assuring her that he would support her and had everything ready for her departure. Michael told her that he loved her and wanted to show her a different life. When Jeffrey read their messages, he was enraged and decided to teach his unfaithful wife a lesson. The trial and the advocate. The trial of Jeffrey Scott began on January 13, 2009. The prosecution argued that it was a premeditated crime. It was evident that the argument between the spouses started in the living room, where a vase was found broken. They then moved through the house, with Ashley enduring violence in nearly every room. Bloodstains were found in almost every room. The divorce attorney Ashley had consulted testified for the prosecution. She explained that she had met with Ashley the day before her death. At that point, all the documents for the divorce were ready. All her client had to do was pack her things and leave the house while her husband was at work. Rachel advised that Ashley should leave secretly. This explains the items and documents found in her car. However, Ashley didn't follow the expert's advice. She didn't want to leave without explaining to her husband, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. The advocate tried her best to help Ashley and even provided her services for a symbolic fee. The attorney also mentioned that she knew her client had been drinking and had quit her beloved job because of it. She did this to numb the emotions she felt in her marriage and needed support. For a long time, the women communicated in secret. This was done to ensure Ashley's departure was as safe as possible. Since her husband controlled all calls, they met on neutral ground or communicated via payphone. Many witnesses confirmed that they had seen scratches or bruises on Ashley, which she carefully concealed under layers of makeup. Some knew the real cause of the injuries but felt powerless to help. In their final report, the medical examiners noted that Ashley had frequently been kicked. It seems Jeffrey would knock her to the ground and then stomp on her. Old bruises from shoes were found on her back and legs. The devil's advocate. The defense team for the accused worked tirelessly to reduce the charge to second-degree crime. The attorney painted the victim in an unflattering light, portraying her as an alcoholic and unstable hysteric. In short, they did everything possible to make the jury believe that Scott also suffered in the marriage. The defense discredited the victim, who couldn't defend herself because she was no longer alive. It was revealed that in 2005, Ashley had been fined for drunk driving. Meanwhile, Jeffrey claimed he wanted to repair the marriage, bought a new home, and was open to having children, all for a woman who had a lover and exchanged intimate photos with him. Regarding the crime itself, he claimed he lost control, realizing his efforts were futile and that Ashley had found someone else. "I regret the pain I caused you," he addressed his wife's family, "but I mourn her loss and pray for her soul." In contrast, during the trial, it was noted that after his arrest, Scott didn't ask about his wife's condition. Instead, he inquired about the outcome of a recent football game. His attorney played dirty. During his statement, he even claimed that the victim sustained most of her injuries during a seizure caused by alcohol withdrawal. An independent expert was found to back up this claim. To refute this, the assistant county medical examiner was called to testify. He read the autopsy results, listed all the injuries on the body, and most importantly, stated the cause of death, which could not have resulted from accidental falls. Prosecutor's argument. The prosecutor argued that the defense's version of an unintentional crime was absurd. It was clear that the victim wanted to escape her tormentor, but, out of affection for her husband, hoped to end things amicably. Meanwhile, the accused showed her the printout of her messages with Michael and attacked her. As he struck her repeatedly, he knew he was causing unbearable pain and suffering. He then finished her off in the garage, where she lost consciousness. Scott saw the severity of her injuries but ignored them and didn't seek medical help. The criminal chose to wait and only then called a doctor. The prosecutor insisted that the accused wanted his wife dead. However, a surprising fact came to light. Investigators found evidence that Ashley had wanted to save the marriage. It was discovered that she had been taking special medication to get pregnant and had supported the purchase of a new home. Perhaps she was so dependent on the toxic relationship that she couldn't imagine life without Jeffrey. However, she eventually decided to leave. It's possible she didn't want to leave secretly, hoping to hear from her husband that he would change and everything would be fine. Victims of abuse often cling to such illusory hopes. Guilty verdict. On January 19, 2009, Jeffrey Scott was found guilty of second-degree crime. Even the judge was dissatisfied with the jury's verdict, criticizing the jurors because the vote in favor of the original charge was 12-1. There was one person who didn't believe the accused was guilty enough. According to state law, a unanimous decision is required to convict someone of first-degree crime. The victim's family was also disheartened. The accused will spend 25 years behind bars without the possibility of parole. Conclusion. Perhaps this punishment isn't enough for someone who tormented a woman for years. The tyrant isolated her from everyone, brainwashed her, and made her think that she and her family weren't good enough to be part of his life. Nevertheless, Ashley's father said, "This is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. I loved that little girl. If she had died a natural death, I would have come to terms with it over time. But knowing how cruelly my daughter died and who was responsible, I will never be able to accept it." The story of Ashley Scott's life teaches us many things, but most importantly, no matter what happens, we should never isolate ourselves from our loved ones. Sometimes, they are the only ones who truly care about us and can help us. Truth is something that exists in reality and corresponds to the real state of affairs, but sometimes it is difficult to accept the truth, and a person creates a lie, which sincerely begins to believe and convince others. 11 young men and one girl met in a hotel room to celebrate the new year. Strange collaboration, you will think, and you will be right. But wait. There is one fact that will completely change your opinion. The men at this party are all members of a sexual minority, which means that 12 friends just met to have fun and celebrate the year 2021. And indeed, they celebrated the new year very cheerfully, so much so that on January 1st, the company had to take the only girl to the hospital, where doctors declared her death. But who was she? How did she die, and was anyone charged in connection with her death? But that's all in order. Next, let's break down the past party almost minute by minute. See what happened on the fateful night, and you'll definitely understand why we started this story with the notion of truth. So on December 31st, 2020, in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, at the 4-star City Garden Grand Hotel, John Paul de Lucerne checked in at 11 a.m. Christine Dacera checked in later, and during the day, 9 other guys checked into room 2207 and room 2209, which were on the same floor. Hotel manager John Paul Khalili joined the merry company just after midnight. New Year's Eve night was all about fun, dancing, and alcohol, lots of alcohol. Rommel Galida woke up around 10 a.m. and noticed Christine sleeping in the bathtub. He covered her with a blanket and went back to sleep. When he woke up several hours later, he found her unconscious and beginning to turn blue. Christine was taken to the hospital by 3 friends and hotel staff, but upon arrival at the emergency room, doctors only pronounced her dead. The 11 guys with the only girl spent the entire night in the hotel room, and she was dead by morning. News headlines about the crime shocked the public. Everyone imagined the story the same way, because it was obvious what a group of young guys and one girl could do all night. But what really happened that New Year's Eve night, and from what Christine Dacera died, was to be solved by the investigation. Christine Angelica Dacera was born on April 13, 1997, into the well-to-do family of John Nestor Dacera and Sharon Rose Faba Dacera, and grew up in Barangay San Isidro, General Santos City. She grew up an outgoing, intelligent, and independent girl. Kristen was a loving sister to her 3 siblings, Monica, Chloe, and JJ. After graduating from high school, she moved to the larger and more promising city of Davao, on the shores of the bay of the same name. There she enrolled in university. Christine studied diligently, danced, modeled, and was active on social media. Christine was also the epitome of beauty and intelligence. In 2017, she graduated with honors from the University of the Philippines Mindanao in Davao City, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Communication Arts with a major in Media Arts. The girl has been actively involved in modeling and theatrical performances. On August 5, 2017, she competed against 8 other contenders for the title of Miss Silva Davao 2017 at the New City Commercial Corporation Mall in Davao City. She came in second place. In June 2018, she participated in the annual fashion show. From September 2017 to January 2019, she worked as a marketing consultant for Gaisano Malls in different parts of Mindanao, including Davao City, General Santos City, Tagum, Toril, and Digos. Christine's life has been colorful and fulfilling. In February 2019, her life's dream came true. She moved to Manila to start working as a flight attendant for PAL Express, a subsidiary of Philippine Airlines. Christine Dacera's last flight as a flight attendant was on December 28, 2020. Christine's death was immediately publicized, due to which numerous discussions and theories were formed in the community. Initially, the police suspected that Kristen was most likely abused and killed by a group of guys she was partying with on New Year's Eve. Even without autopsy results and a toxicology report, Ouachita City police filed preliminary charges of assault and murder against 11 men. The Philippine National Police declared the case closed. Arrests were made with charges and identification of suspects. 3 of the party participants were detained after surrendering to authorities on their own. But the main answer to what really caused Christine's death was the forensic medical report. The autopsy of Christine's body was conducted in Bossier City at the Rizal Funeral Home under the direction of Forensic Medical Officer Police Major Michael Nick Sartiento. On January 3, 2021, the examination of Christine Dacera's body was completed, and a forensic report was issued which found that death was due to natural causes due to a ruptured aortic aneurysm. However, it also mentioned bruises on the girl's right arm, right thigh, knees, ankles, and right foot, as well as a linear abrasion on her right thigh. Deeply healed lacerations and abrasions were also reported during the genital exam. The National Capital Region Police Department announced that a special investigation team had been set up to look into the case, but Christine's family was unwilling to accept the fact that a young, vibrant girl could die a natural death prematurely. At a press conference on January 5, 2021, Christine Dacera's family stated that they had seen the autopsy report that said she died of an aneurysm. However, they stated that the autopsy performed was incomplete and requested a second autopsy. The parents of the deceased have been trying to understand how Christine's aorta was ruptured. After all, the police and the Dacera family lawyer believed that the aneurysm was the result of assault or abuse, which means it was not a natural death, and the perpetrators should be punished. The prosecutor's office identified all of the 11 men who were with Christine throughout the night. Some of them were her co-workers. Other young men were friends of her friends whom Christine was meeting for the first time. It turned out that Christine was the initiator of this party. She had booked the hotel room herself a few days in advance and coordinated this party with her friends. Her mom, Sharon, was aware of her daughter's friendship with men and never opposed it. Since childhood, Kristen had found it easier to socialize and make friends with the male gender, so it was considered normal in their family. In addition, she and her friends usually did not go home for vacations, so it became a tradition for them to meet each other every year. Kristen was able to call her family just after midnight to inform them of the ongoing celebration at the Makati Hotel and to wish her family a happy new year. During the video call, the family could see Kristen's friends and the surrounding festive environment. However, there has been new speculation about the abuse allegation, so in the case, the main evidence of the incident became the frames of the video from the hotel lobby, the study of which helped the police almost minute by minute to reconstruct the picture of what happened. It should be noted that the party was to be held in room 2209. It was this room and booked Christine Dacera. The main events begin to unfold in the late afternoon. At 11:21 p.m., Christine leaves room 2209 and goes to room 2207. At 11:38 p.m., the company returns to their room. Christine goes last. She is holding her shoes in a glass. At 2:50 a.m., Christine, holding the hand of a new acquaintance, Valentine, goes to room 2207. While they are at a neighbor's house, a hotel employee brings an extra mattress to room 2209. At 2:52 a.m., Valentine accompanies Christine to her room. Valentine's gait shows that the girl is already quite drunk. Her gait is too relaxed, and she is holding a bottle in her hand. The friends stop at the door, and Christine suddenly kisses Valentine, but the man quickly pulls away, after which the couple goes inside. At 3:15 a.m., Christine hurriedly leaves her room and goes to her neighbor's room, and 6 minutes later, one of the guys leaves there. He heads to room 2209, presumably to call his friends. At 3:22 a.m., Christine Dacera can be seen chatting with another man in the next room on the right side of the hallway, while two other men walk past them. She looked upset. Suddenly, Christine hugs one of her friends, and then they disappear from the view of the cameras altogether. At 4:13 a.m., John de Lucerne can be seen carrying Christine back to the first room. At 4:22 a.m., the camera again captures Christine at the door of room 2207. It's unclear what brought her there again. She practically falls off her feet, and a guy who looks like John de Lucerne picks her up by the waist and carries her to room 2209. Christine looks pretty drunk. At 5:05 a.m., the camera captures Christine laughing as she runs away from a guy who looks like Louis de Lima. Afterward, they're standing outside room 2207. Christine looks normal, and with him she enters room 2209. At 6:23 a.m., Christine makes her last appearance on camera alive. For the last time, Valentine carries her in his arms from room 2207. The girl is conscious. It was obviously an eventful night, but the most important truth still remains behind the scenes. The party continued until dawn. Around 12 noon, when Christine was found unconscious in the bathtub, her friends carried her to the floor and repeatedly attempted cardiopulmonary resuscitation. After unsuccessful attempts, they called for help at the front desk. A few minutes later, the hotel manager and the head of security arrived in the room. They used a wheelchair to lower Christine to the first floor of the hotel. Rommel Galido accompanied Christine to the hospital. The doctors unfortunately only stated the girl's death. Rommel called Christine's mom and broke the bad news. It can be assumed that what is happening really looks like a fun party, and definitely to be in one room such a large company was cramped, so young people chaotically moved all night from room to room. But the investigators had suspicions about the use of illegal substances to enhance the effect of alcohol. When questioned, some of the detainees claimed that there were no illegal substances during the party, but only whiskey and tequila. It is worth noting that illegal drugs were initially the centerpiece of the investigation, as the testimony of one of the detainees reported that Christine had doubts about the contents of the drinks and suggested that someone may have spiked it with an unknown substance. It transpired that guests were asked to bring their own food and drinks. Because of this, there was speculation that Christine Dacera's drink was poisoned and could have triggered the aneurysm that eventually led to her death. But the autopsy report stated that no alcohol or illegal drugs taken the night before her death would cause this type of aortic dilatation or defect. Substance information was later unconfirmed, as no illegal substances or traces of them were found in the room or in the suspect's personal belongings. An examination and search of the two rooms, as well as the neighboring room 2009, looking for potential evidence, did not yield the desired results that at least indirectly proved the violent death of Christine Dacera. Under questioning, Mark Rosales and John de Lucerne publicly admitted their unconventional orientation and stated that Christine was their best friend and they would never hurt her. John also revealed that they had to bring Christine back from room 2207 because she was already vomiting early in the morning. Rommel Galido said that around 10 a.m. he found Christine in the bathtub of their room and thought she was asleep, so he just covered her with a blanket. However, around noon, after he woke up and went back to wake her up, he realized the girl was blue and not breathing. He rushed to his friends for help. The hotel advised that she be rushed to Makati Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead on arrival, reportedly due to a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The hospital reported the death to the Makati City Police. Meanwhile, other men from a neighboring hotel room had left by then. On January 4th, the Philippine National Police sent a separate statement to the media about the Christine Dacera incident, saying that the case is almost solved despite some missing details and conflicting reports on the matter. Police Chief Debold Sinas said they already have 3 suspects, and they have been apprehended. Other suspects were being sought. But as early as January 6th, the Makati City Prosecutor's Office ordered the release of the 3 men who were in custody due to lack of evidence. Prosecutors insisted that the evidence presented was insufficient to establish that Christine was abused. They also said that even if Christine Dacera was abused, the police have yet to prove that this is what caused her death. Moreover, the party was a gathering of men of non-traditional orientation where they were all flirting with each other, and Christine was an extra woman. Rommel Galido, as well as most of those present at the party, were stewards and co-workers of Christine Dacera at PL Airlines, indicating that she was well acquainted with these men and their orientation. On January 13, 2021, the Makati City Prosecutor's Office launched a preliminary investigation and based on an official autopsy that confirmed that the 23-year-old died from a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The prosecutor's office also called on the police to release the results of the victim's DNA analysis, toxicology report, and histopathic study. However, Christine's mother, Karen Dacera, criticized the report that her daughter was not abused. She appeared on a news show where she claimed that her daughter was abused by a group of guys. If you see Christine's body, if you're a mother, you'll probably feel the pain that Christine suffered because of them. But my daughter can't talk anymore because she's dead. The woman spoke out on the TV program. Sharon cited the lacerations and bruises on her daughter's body, which were not recorded in the autopsy, as evidence that the report was inaccurate. Christine's family later said they wanted another autopsy to challenge authorities' initial findings that she died a natural death. The basis was injuries and bruising that were not documented in the first report. Family spokesperson Brick Reyes said that the injuries on the victim's legs and arms, as well as her remains, would provide sufficient evidence that Christine was abused. Brick Reyes also said that they believe the young woman was drugged and abused before she died. Christine was already intoxicated and complained that something seemed to have been spiked in her drink during the New Year's Eve celebration. Christine's parents said they have filed a complaint demanding the immediate dismissal of Michael Nick Sarmiento for gross negligence and gross incompetence in preparing Christine's forensic report and death certificate. Dr. Marissy Ramos, a friend of Dacera's family, told reporters that the body was subjected to a second autopsy. He also emphasized that the biological fluids recovered from the second autopsy have been forwarded to the Death Investigation Unit, which will provide more details after a final evaluation and consolidation of all the findings of its forensic team. The pathology autopsy results from the Southern Police District Crime Lab Division's forensic report, which was eventually shared on social media, showed that the cause of death was consistent with what was previously reported as a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The official autopsy revealed that Christina was not abused on the night of her death. The actual cause of Dacera's death lies in the aorta. The constant increase in blood pressure in the aorta caused the defect to weaken, and eventually the aorta ruptured, the Philippine National Police Crime Lab report said. At the time the aorta rupture occurred, there was blood loss, so Christine felt various symptoms such as weakness, nausea, and sweating. The blood loss due to the aortic rupture killed her within a few hours, the report said. This means that the girl had a ruptured aortic aneurysm, which enlarged the lower part of the main vessel, aorta, that supplies blood to the entire body. This vessel runs from a person's heart through the chest and abdomen. Since the aorta is the largest vessel in the body, if it ruptures, a person can lose a huge amount of blood and potentially be fatal, as in this case. In addition, it was noted that Christine's aneurysm did not occur recently. It started a long time ago. The report states that dilatation is a chronic condition and was present long before her death. Had she not died that fateful night, she would still have died in any scenario that would cause her blood pressure to rise enough to rupture the aneurysm. The autopsy also revealed that Dacera's heart was enlarged compared to a healthy heart, further confirming Christine Dacera's undiagnosed hypertension. For the most part, it can be confirmed that the girl's death was due to natural causes. But the widespread misinformation brought shame and persecution to those 11 young guys who were at the party and sincerely tried to give Christine first aid, but they were labeled as criminals. All 11 guys who were charged preliminarily have since been released from custody. The Ouachita City prosecutor's office tried to rectify the situation and said that at the time of the publicity, the evidence presented was not enough to establish that Christine Dacera was abused, and it was impossible to obtain proper evidence at that time. Therefore, they had to build a version based on signs of deterioration of the victim's body. In addition, 2 other suspects said that the police forced them to give false testimony that there were illegal drugs at the New Year's Eve party. Another participant in the story explained his kiss with Christine, which was captured by surveillance cameras on the eve of her death. According to the man, it was Christine herself who initiated it. He, however, tried to push her away. Law enforcement officials were criticized for not conducting a thorough toxicological examination when the flight attendant's body was found. The charges against the men were later dropped due to lack of evidence. The death of Christine Dacera attracted widespread media attention as a result of suspicious circumstances that seemed to contradict the findings of the Philippine National Police. Christine's case continued to receive a lot of publicity online as further developments came from her family, who in no way could accept the truth and believe in the natural death of their daughter. The girl's mother, Sharon, appealed to President Rodrigo Duterte for help in seeking justice for her daughter. "I am an ordinary person. You also have a daughter. I want to speak out openly because I don't want anyone to be victimized by the kind of cruelty and barbarism like my Christine." Christine Dacera was buried at Forest Lake Memorial Park in her hometown of General Santos, more than a week after her death. A wave of condolences, reposts, and farewells traveled across the social stanzas of Christine's friends and co-workers. Ultimately, the unconventional case of Christine Dacera serves as a prime example of when the media spreads misinformation and how it can affect the public as well as impact those involved. As we come to the end, the story wants to return to the truth, which sooner or later, but in any form, is bound to take its place of honor. After all, the truth is one. But Christine's family is still convinced that the girl was killed by these people and that there is something secret in this story. Personally, I do not understand and found no answers to the question about bruises and wounds on Christine's body. Why was it hushed up? It seems that despite the presence of wounds and bruises on Christine's body, the cause of her death was not them, but the rupture of the aorta due to heart disease, so they did not focus on the wounds on her body. In my opinion, there are a lot of oddities and inconsistencies in this case, but you guys are the judge. I would like to wish Christine's family to accept the irreparable loss, because young guys, whether they are guilty or not, will end up remembering the same sad story every New Year's Eve and making excuses for the rest of their lives. Where does the line lie that once crossed, there's no return? How does an ordinary woman transform from a loving wife and beloved mother into a cruel murderer, capable of dividing a nation into 2 opposing groups? And how does her name become a constant topic among locals and newspaper headlines for years? Roxana Valdez could answer this question. Murderers don't stand out in a crowd, are not recognizable during dinner, and might even live under the same roof without revealing their true nature. They are indistinguishable from those who never cross that line. Thus, no one could have imagined what Roxana did on that spring evening of April 5th, 2014. And when they found out, They simply couldn't believe it. But let's start from the beginning. Little is known about Roxana's past. Despite the efforts of many Chilean reporters who competed to tell her story, they could find almost nothing about her. The only information from her criminal file was sparse. Born in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile, in 1957. That was it. Perhaps the lack of information was due to journalistic ethics, as the locals, known for their fiery temper and unique customs, might have retaliated against Roxana's relatives for her crime, potentially turning their lives into a living hell. Roxana Valdez was married to a man whose name, for reasons unknown, remains either undisclosed or unknown to the press. She had a son with him. It's clear that her marriage wasn't the dream every girl hopes for. As the couple eventually parted ways in 2011, as a single mother in a small village where jobs were scarce, Roxana faced significant challenges. In such communities, the primary occupation was growing and selling fruits and vegetables. Even the local educational institutions focused on agriculture. It was in this setting that Roxana found employment at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. She worked as a night supervisor at the school, ensuring that students slept at night and did not engage in unruly activities. Her responsibilities didn't include the actual upbringing of the children. Roxana's son also attended this boarding school, as she worked in the fields during the day and couldn't give him the attention he needed. At the same boarding school where Roxana worked, Claudio Muñoz Ramirez held the position of head of grounds maintenance. His duties often required him to work during the night, which is how he came to meet Roxana. Despite being 14 years younger than her, they found much to talk about. Roxana would spend entire nights discussing school affairs and her own failed marriage with Claudio. They had common ground in their personal lives as well. Claudio had 2 daughters whom he adored, but felt disconnected from their mother, contemplating divorce several times. However, he remained in the marriage due to a promise he had made to her late father. Over time, Claudio seemingly forgot his promise and began spending his free time with Roxana, away from his family. Eventually, he made a decisive move. Without explaining himself to his wife, Claudio gathered his belongings and left their home. It was clear he went to Roxana, who happily welcomed him into her life. Their relationship progressed rapidly and effectively. Roxana let into her home a man she barely knew, with whom she had only enjoyed nighttime conversations. She seemed to overlook the fact that there were children around needing constant attention. Amidst these enjoyable and heartfelt talks, Roxana failed to notice Claudio's true nature. He was, in reality, quite temperamental and sometimes even cruel. However, it was perhaps too early to judge who was more cruel between the two. The first serious outburst of aggression from Claudio took place within the walls of the boarding school. On a scheduled community cleanup day, students were assigned different areas to tidy up. Brooms, buckets, dustpans, and rags were distributed, everything needed for a thorough cleaning. As often happens, some students protested and refused to participate. Claudio, responsible for cleanliness but lacking any teaching experience, became infuriated with these students and threatened that, in the absence of teachers at night, he would beat anyone who didn't participate. Whether he would have followed through on this threat is unknown, but the students eventually started cleaning and later collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of physical violence. The principal, displeased, asked Claudio to submit a voluntary resignation. It's important to note that the Don Gregorio boarding school was practically the only place in the area offering stable and reasonably paid employment. Claudio spent some time looking for work in fields and at fruit bases, but when it became clear his efforts were in vain, he and Roxana decided to seek a better life elsewhere, leaving her son in the boarding school to continue his education. They deemed it too risky to embark on this venture with him. To avoid dependency on employers, having been burned once already, the couple decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They moved to a favorable location, the commune of Molina, a couple of hours' drive from the Chilean capital. This place is well known for its vineyards, producing renowned wine brands exported worldwide. Roxana and Claudio purchased a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and made their first steps in their small family business. Claudio handled the purchasing and transportation of the products from suppliers to the kiosk. while Roxana was in charge of sales throughout the day. Hiring an employee wasn't feasible, as it would mean additional expenses. Moreover, they feared that an employee might not monitor the perishable goods closely enough, leading to further losses. Claudio was visibly upset and even angry when he found out that Roxana was expecting their first child together. Perhaps it was a moment that required serious reflection, but Roxana, perhaps blinded by her new relationship and their flourishing business, didn't oppose her husband's view. She agreed that once the child was born, they would soon hand it over to her relatives for upbringing. However, it turned out there was no child to give away. Since that time, Claudio's behavior changed drastically. He often yelled at his wife and sometimes even resorted to physical violence. Neighbors from nearby houses, unhappy with their noisy new neighbors, witnessed this behavior many times and often called the Chilean police, the Carabineros, to intervene and calm the domestic disputes. On one occasion, when the Carabineros arrived in response to a call, they witnessed Roxana, in tears and almost half-naked, running out of the house, followed by Claudio. Roxana confessed to the officers that she was a victim of systematic domestic violence, which had led to a miscarriage. She even required psychological help after the incident. However, as time passed, the grievances were forgotten, and the troubled couple, as if nothing had happened, continued to live together as before. Following the incident, Claudio should have faced criminal charges, but a compassionate Roxana decided to give him another chance, extracting a promise that it was a one-time occurrence. Claudio vowed never to repeat such behavior, but his past actions with his ex-wife suggested his words might not hold much weight. Unfortunately, history repeated itself. Claudio temporarily ceased his physical abuse of Roxana but developed a habit of leaving home at night to drink heavily in local bars. He spent considerable amounts of their family budget not only on alcohol, but also on local women of ill repute. Roxana endured her husband's behavior, believing that Claudio would settle down once they had a child together. In a sense, she was right. In 2013, Roxana gave birth to a healthy child. Claudio stopped his carousing and fully immersed himself in their business, which now needed to expand. They purchased another kiosk in a neighboring area and another vehicle for product transportation. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection as they lived and worked in less safe areas. The family's wealth increased significantly, but only on paper. Claudio reverted to his old ways, squandering money on drinking and again resorting to domestic violence against Roxana. In Roxana's testimony, she recounted the escalating abuse in her relationship with Claudio. Initially, Claudio's drinking was infrequent, but it soon increased in frequency. He would come home inebriated, accusing Roxana of imagined infidelities, leading to physical and sexual abuse. Despite her pregnancy, Claudio's actions seemed deliberately harmful, culminating in a miscarriage in August 2012 that plunged Roxana into a lengthy depression. One night, following his usual pattern, Claudio went out to a local bar and did not return home until the next morning. Roxana, used to his behavior, still worried about him. It turned out that Claudio had stolen 5 million Chilean pesos, about $6,000, which Roxana had from selling her mother's house to spend on alcohol and brothels. This betrayal shocked Roxana, as the money was for their shared business and was hidden in their daughter's room. When Claudio finally returned home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. Uninterested in discussing, Claudio hit her and admitted to squandering all the money. This was the last straw for Roxana. Without a word, she went to their bedroom, retrieved a revolver intended for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest. He died instantly, surprised by her drastic action. Roxana, equally shocked by her own actions, attempted to stem the bleeding from the fatal gunshot wound, but it was too late. The close-range shot from a .38 caliber bullet was fatal. Roxana's desperate act marked a tragic culmination of ongoing domestic turmoil. Roxana's testimony reveals her profound remorse and recognition of the immorality of her actions. She confesses that when she went for the revolver, her intention was not to intimidate Claudio but to kill him. She recalls the countless times Claudio abused and assaulted her, and her failure to report him to the authorities or retract her complaint out of fear. She feared being alone even before they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's immediate concern was the potential impact on their daughter, especially if Roxana were imprisoned and the child sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided that the best way to deal with the situation was to dispose of the body and report Claudio missing, aware that his frequent disappearances during drinking binges were known to the police. Disposing of the body was a daunting task for Roxana, a delicate woman. She decided to remove it piece by piece. First, she used kitchen knives intended for meat cutting to sever the limbs and head. This process required 5 knives, as they kept dulling. Then she boiled the dismembered parts in the largest pots she had, all while playing with her young daughter, who was oblivious to her mother's actions and her father's fate. Roxana's calculated approach to disposing of the body while maintaining a semblance of normalcy for her daughter highlights the complexity and desperation of her situation. The day after cooking and cooling the body parts, Roxana packed them into plastic containers, organizing them separately: hands, legs, head, and torso. Each container was then placed in a garbage bag. She loaded them into her car and headed to St. Lucia to scatter the bags on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she thoroughly cleaned her house with bleach. However, once in St. Lucia, she couldn't muster the courage to dispose of the bags from her car, despite finding a suitable spot. In her testimony, Roxana expressed her internal conflict. "It's strange. I had the bravery to commit this heinous crime and dismember a human body as if it were a piglet, but I couldn't bring myself to dispose of the evidence. I was nervous throughout the drive, feeling constantly watched, fearing that police would stop and search my car at any turn. This fear led to panic, even though I had a backup plan involving my daughter, pretending to rush her to the hospital if stopped. I even thought of how to pinch her to make her cry louder." Unable to discard the remains, Roxana returned home with them, hiding the bags in the garage. She cleaned her car's interior with bleach again and visited Claudio's relatives, claiming that he had stolen a large sum of money and hadn't been home for days. They merely shrugged in response. She then visited her mother and brother. Her mother was extremely worried about Roxana's behavior. She was not eating, had a glassy-eyed look, and repeatedly asked the same questions. The only question she answered promptly was about Claudio's absence, saying he went to buy goods for their store, but had a flat tire and got delayed. Returning home and alone with her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down. She called her brother for help. When he arrived, she confessed everything and showed him the containers. Naturally, her brother was in shock. When Roxana called her brother, she wanted to vent and share the nightmarish years she endured with Claudio, but above all, she needed his help to get rid of the containers holding the body. However, her brother refused, fearing police involvement and the possibility of being charged as an accomplice. He urged her to confess to the Carabineros, Chilean police, insisting he would do it if she didn't. Disappointed but realizing she had no other choice, Roxana complied. That night, Roxana went to the 4th police station and announced her intention to make an important statement. The officers, familiar with her, initially thought she wanted to report her troublesome husband. However, they were shocked by her confession. Roxana was immediately arrested. The news spread rapidly throughout the area, attracting countless journalists around the station. They waited eagerly to photograph Roxana as she was led out, hoping to capture a few images and, if lucky, ask her and the officers some questions. As the journalists waited, Roxana was eventually brought out. Handcuffed and in distress, she exclaimed, "I was afraid he would kill me one day," before being escorted into a police car. The case seemed straightforward. Roxana had confessed, provided evidence, and voluntarily surrendered. However, prosecutor Monica Ballesteros wanted a deeper investigation. Skeptical of Roxana's easy confession, she requested an extended arrest to conduct a forensic examination. Ballesteros aimed to prove that Claudio was still alive during the dismemberment, which would significantly increase Roxana's sentence. The judge granted a 60-day detention for further investigation. Meanwhile, Roxana's attorney, Jeronimo Gutierrez, argued that Roxana acted under extreme emotional distress, possibly exacerbated by postpartum depression and chronic domestic abuse. She emphasized Roxana's cooperation and voluntary confession as mitigating factors. However, the prosecution's theory that Claudio was alive during dismemberment crumbled after forensic results. it was confirmed that Claudio died from the gunshot wound to the chest. The bullet from the .38 caliber revolver caused a heart rupture and damaged vital organs, disproving the prosecution's initial hypothesis. Given these developments, the aggravating circumstances were dismissed. Another lawyer, Juan Pablo Cardenas, who sought to make a name for himself in this high-profile case, pointed out that the firearm used in the murder was legally registered. He also noted that Roxana's first report of domestic violence to the police was filed just 20 days after the couple started living together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela, after a medical examination, submitted documents to the court indicating that Roxana was extremely mentally unstable at the time of the crime. This meant she wasn't fully aware of her actions, and her emotional instability was linked to the loss of 2 children, one in August 2012 and another just 3 weeks before the crime. Furthermore, a forensic examination requested by the prosecutor revealed that Claudio had a high blood alcohol level of 3 grams per liter at the time of his death. On April 17, 2015, after a year of various examinations, investigations, and evidence gathering, Roxana's trial began. The media, often sensationalizing tragedies, dubbed the case the Melina Cooks case, alluding to Roxana's dismemberment and boiling of her former husband. Some unscrupulous journalists seeking to attract attention to their publications even fabricated stories that Roxana had eaten part of the remains, although this was merely a product of their imagination. Roxana, aware of the media portrayal and deeply distressed by it, refused to make any statements during the trial. The prosecutors tried to influence the judge by emphasizing that Roxana committed a grave crime by Chilean standards, patricide. However, they couldn't prove that the murder was premeditated. The defense attorney, in turn, argued that his client acted in self-defense, protecting herself from a brute who had brutally mistreated her for years. The court hearing lasted several weeks, and during this time, the entire population of Chile followed the case closely. Prosecutor Monica requested a 15-year prison sentence for the accused. However, the judges, having carefully listened to the defense and the jury's opinion, sentenced Roxana to 6 years in a correctional facility with a lenient regime. Claudio's relatives, who understandably wished for a life sentence or even execution for Roxana, and were already protesting when they heard the prosecutor asking for only 15 years, were utterly dismayed by the actual court decision. They tried to deny any violence in the family and argued that Claudio, being a businessman and financially independent, could not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana. They also claimed that Claudio had confessed to them that Roxana often took out the revolver from the closet and told her husband that she would kill him one day. Claudio's sister, in an interview with the press, even tried to blame Chile as a state, arguing that it's a country where there is no justice, and the judicial system is utterly corrupt, given that such brutal criminals are given such short sentences, comparable to minor robberies. Even Giselle, Claudio's first wife, defended her ex-husband, assuring everyone that there couldn't have been any violence from Claudio's side. She had lived with him for many years, and during all that time, he never dared to lay a finger on her. Meanwhile, Roxana often caused disputes, motivated by her jealousy and possessiveness. Regarding Roxana's subsequent imprisonment, she spent only 2/3 of her sentence in the colony before being transferred to a semi-open education center in Talca for good behavior. Roxana was allowed to communicate with her daughter and was eventually released early. The press, of course, stirred up public interest in this case again, and the public was extremely outraged that the cook from Melina was released early. However, there were also those who, although considering Roxana a murderer, still justified her actions, seeing her as a victim in the whole situation. The debate over this case continues in the country to this day. Overall, this story highlights the grave consequences that can result if domestic violence is not addressed at early stages. The case of Rosa Maria Peral. Vinuela, a body in flames. A love triangle typically leads to no good, with all involved parties inevitably suffering as each one becomes dependent. The very emergence of a new participant in a relationship signals trouble in the couple's interaction. Yet some believe that monogamy is a thing of the past, advocating for relationships where one is not limited in the number of loved ones. Such was the belief of our protagonist today, who shattered the lives and destinies of the men unfortunate enough to be close to her. The case of Rosa Maria Peral Vinuela caused quite a stir in Spain a few years ago. This woman easily entered into relationships, manipulated men by playing with their feelings, and then got rid of her tiresome lovers using harsh, sometimes radical methods. Intriguingly, she worked in law enforcement and often engaged in workplace romances. Rosa was blessed with attractive looks, which she used to her advantage. She had been in an official marriage, was the center of an intimate scandal, and was simultaneously engaged to 2 different men. However, these adventures were not enough for her. She dared to commit a crime against a weary fiancé, attempting to pin the blame on her ex-husband and a lover. The most horrifying aspect was that her own child witnessed this appalling act. Rosa Peral, the early years, Rosa Maria Peral. Vinuela was born on October 15, 1985, in a suburb of Barcelona, becoming the 2nd child in her family. She grew up in a modest household that had migrated from Andalusia in search of a better life. Her mother, Maria, was a homemaker dedicated to creating a cozy home environment and raising the children, while her father, Francisco, worked as a security guard. Rosa was raised alongside her older brother, Paul, with whom she was very close. Those personally acquainted with her described Rosa as sweet, kind-hearted, and friendly. Neighbors spoke highly of the Peral family, considering them a united, strong, and happy household. In school, Rosa was a good student. She wasn't necessarily at the top of her class, but was diligent and persistent, always striving for high grades. She was also active in sports and dreamed of a career in law enforcement. After graduating from high school, she enrolled at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, while simultaneously preparing for the exams and tests required to enter the police academy in Avila. Rosa was strikingly attractive and possessed a powerful charisma, which attracted many admirers from a young age. She skillfully leveraged her allure. During her college years, she worked as a waitress in one of the popular nightclubs, earning a decent salary and tips that allowed her to pay for her education independently. At that time, Rosa was dating a young man named Ruben Carbo, who served in the Barcelona City Guard. He helped his girlfriend prepare for the competitive examinations at the academy. A talent detection test, a multiple-choice exam, and an oral interview. Although Rosa didn't pass the physical test on her first try, her perseverance paid off, and she was eventually admitted to the academy, where she underwent professional training. Peral specialized in general law enforcement activities. She quickly advanced in her career, was highly valued at her service, and her salary allowed her to live comfortably without wanting for anything. A valued employee, a stellar wife and mother. Soon after graduating from the police academy, the young woman married her beloved Ruben. The couple had a modest wedding attended only by their closest relatives and friends. The newlyweds moved to Barcelona, where they soon welcomed 2 daughters, one after the other. At work, Rosa was regarded as a responsible, disciplined, and promising employee. Her attractive and approachable appearance often led to her participation in social media videos broadcasted on local television. In these videos, she encouraged residents and visitors of the city to behave lawfully and with integrity. She even gained some popularity, with people sometimes recognizing her on the street. Rosa was successful in her career, respected and valued as an employee, and at the same time, she was a loving wife and a caring mother to her 2 children. She had an impeccable reputation, inspiring genuine admiration and even envy among those around her. However, no one could have imagined the double life she was leading until one incident. An intimate scandal and the collapse of a reputation. In early 2011, Rosa's colleagues began receiving emails containing photographs and videos of a personal nature. The images showed the married Peral engaging in intimate moments with her former partner, Junior Inspector Oscar Leffs, at their place of work. Outraged by her lover's actions, Rosa immediately filed a complaint with the police, demanding compensation for emotional distress and strict legal action against the perpetrator. However, it proved impossible to establish that Oscar was indeed the one who sent out the photos and videos, though Rosa had no doubts about it, and he avoided any repercussions. Nonetheless, both employees were demoted and transferred to different departments for their inappropriate behavior. Moreover, the distribution of compromising materials did not cease, with not only colleagues but also friends and relatives of Rosa receiving them. A serious scandal erupted, and Rosa's previously impeccable reputation was shattered. The situation had a negative impact on her work, family life, and relationships with colleagues and friends. The young woman was acutely aware that she was being judged by everyone around her, and her actions became one of the most discussed topics. Furthermore, some expressed their disapproval of her immoral actions directly to her face. Rosa's character began to deteriorate rapidly. From a friendly, sociable person, she turned into someone perceived as harsh and even spiteful. However, many rightly considered this transformation a defensive reaction to the bullying and condemnation she faced. Surprisingly, despite such a scandalous and resident ordeal, Rosa managed to maintain her marriage with Ruben. Yet, the trust between them was irreparably damaged. They stayed together for almost another year and a half until a new romantic interest entered Rosa's life. Another workplace romance and professional misconduct around mid-2012, it became known about Rosa's new romance with another colleague, Albert Lopez Ferrero. The couple spent a significant amount of time trying to keep their relationship under wraps, but between 2011 and 2012, they became involved in several incidents related to the abuse of their official powers. During the investigations into these incidents, the partners and lovers protected each other, which allowed them both to evade any disciplinary actions. It's worth noting that Albert was reserved, shared little about himself, and didn't make close friends among his colleagues. He was seriously into boxing and had a quick temper, which sometimes made him very aggressive, often to the detriment of those who happened to be near him at the wrong time. For instance, in 2011, while he and Rosa were patrolling the streets of Barcelona, Ferrero got into an argument with an immigrant from Senegal who was selling goods on the street without the necessary permit. Instead of taking the vendor to the station, after a brief verbal altercation, Ferrero physically assaulted him, causing severe injuries. However, during the subsequent investigation, Peral defended her lover, claiming that the victim had attacked him first and that he was merely defending himself. Another similar incident occurred, and in 2012, a suspect that Rosa and Albert were supposed to bring to the station mysteriously lost his life during the arrest. The investigation led nowhere, and the partners insisted that the fault lay solely with the deceased himself. Eventually, their version of events was accepted, and the case was dismissed due to a lack of evidence of any wrongdoing. As for the relationship between the two, it could be described as sporadic. The lovers grew closer through their work together, but their passion ebbed and flowed. Albert showed little interest in Rosa beyond physical intimacy. Their affair didn't progress but continued for several years without ending. It seems that both were content with this arrangement. Divorce and a new love triangle. When Rosa and Albert's relationship was no longer a secret, Ruben finally decided to divorce his unfaithful wife, realizing she would never change and would continue to seek other romantic encounters whenever the opportunity arose. The couple managed to avoid public scandals and bitter confrontations, but their parting could hardly be called amicable. Ruben soon entered into a serious relationship with a woman named Antonia, who quickly found common ground not only with his daughters, but also with his ex-wife. Rosa often called Ruben's new partner, sharing her personal disappointments and professional troubles. Antonia listened calmly, offered comfort and even advice. For Antonia, this communication was a sort of assurance that Ruben had no lingering ties to his ex-wife and that their relationship was truly over. Regarding custody, the daughters stayed with their mother, but Ruben was allowed to see them any time and take them home for weekends and holidays. After the divorce, Rosa chose not to continue her relationship with Albert, feeling it was leading nowhere. However, she soon started a new romance with Pedro Rodriguez, who had long shown a keen interest in her and had been actively courting her. Little was known about Pedro. He was born in Barcelona in 1979, where he spent his childhood and most of his adult life. He also worked in law enforcement, albeit in the transportation department, so their professional paths rarely crossed. At the time he met Rosa, Pedro was married and raising a 5-year-old son with his wife. Yet, Rosa's allure was irresistible to him. Consumed with thoughts of her day and night, he didn't hesitate to leave his family as soon as she reciprocated his feelings. Adding complexity to the situation was the fact that Pedro was a longtime friend of Albert's. When news of his romance with Rosa became public, the ex-lover was baffled. Driven by a painful jealousy, he began to harass Rosa, demanding explanations for her actions. To defuse the situation, Peral told Ferrero that the connection between her and Rodriguez could never match the chemistry they had shared over the years. This way, she implied to her former lover that she still harbored certain feelings and physical attraction towards him. The resumption of their intimate relationship seemed inevitable, as a definitive end to their saga had yet to be declared. A double engagement Rosa and Pedro seemed to be living more than a blissful life together. Along with Rosa's children, they settled into a spacious home in a nice neighborhood of Barcelona, traveled often, appeared everywhere as a close-knit family, and seemed genuinely happy. Feeling ready for the next step in their relationship, Pedro proposed to Rosa with a beautiful ring, and she joyfully accepted. The couple started planning their wedding. Around the same time, Rosa began secretly meeting with Albert. Typically, they spent time together in hotel rooms on the outskirts of the city to avoid being seen. Rosa even complained to her lover that Pedro didn't quite measure up to him in intimacy. She also mentioned Pedro's difficult personality and expressed doubts about her future happiness with him. In January 2017, Albert, previously indifferent to serious commitments, unexpectedly proposed to Rosa, presenting her with an expensive ring. Remarkably, she accepted his proposal too, wearing the ring secretly from Pedro. The fact of her double engagement greatly flattered Rosa, and she even bragged about it to her closest friends. Soon, Pedro noticed changes in Rosa's behavior, and her frequent absences led him to suspect. Moreover, Rosa found it increasingly difficult to justify her meetups with Albert. This strained Rosa and Pedro's relationship significantly. They argued often, and Rosa's increasingly aggressive and unpredictable behavior alarmed Pedro, making him fear for his safety. Eventually, Albert disclosed his affair with Rosa to his former friend, sparking yet another scandal. Rosa admitted to the betrayal but assured Pedro it was a one-time incident, driven by threats and pressure from Albert. Pedro pretended to believe her, not wanting to end their engagement, still hoping for a future of happiness together. However, from that point on, he began to monitor her every move, or at least that's what she told everyone. Pedro's fate-sealed Rosa claimed that her fiancé's jealousy was unbearable. He scrutinized her phone calls, monitored her social media interactions, and restricted her from spending time with friends. This behavior infuriated her, and any affection she once had for Pedro had vanished. Instead of confronting him or ending the engagement, Rosa devised a drastic plan to eliminate her troublesome fiancé. She decided to end his life, with Albert playing a pivotal role in this scheme, ready to be the fall guy if anything went awry. In mid-April 2017, Rosa confided her plans to her lover. She outlined that Pedro needed to be removed in such a manner that Ruben would appear to be the primary suspect. This was Rosa's way of retaliating against her ex-husband, who was still fighting for custody of their children. Notably, at this time, her fiancé was undergoing rehabilitation from a complex spinal surgery, during which a titanium plate had been inserted. The conspirators meticulously prepared for their heinous act. Rosa purchased a disposable phone, which she planned to dispose of immediately after the deed was done. They also pre-discussed the details and alternative plans in case any part of their original scheme proved unfeasible. Lovers and accomplices. On the night of April 30th, Rosa prepared a farewell romantic dinner for her fiancé. They spent the evening together, with Pedro blissfully unaware that he had less than a day to live. The following day, Sunday, they went shopping together, visited Rosa's parents, and then headed to her ex-husband's house to pick up the girls who had been staying with him for the weekend. At home, Rosa fed the children and then sent them to their room on the second floor, asking them to stay upstairs. The exact moment Albert entered the house remains unclear, as the accounts from those involved have repeatedly changed and contradicted one another. It is known that Rosa drugged Pedro with an unidentified substance mixed into a water-diluted medication he was taking post-surgery to alleviate pain. Shortly after consuming this mixture, Pedro's reaction became significantly delayed. He struggled with spatial orientation, moved slowly, and had poor cognitive function, making him an easy target. The exact method by which the lovers ended Pedro's life remains unclear, but one of Rosa's daughters, who ventured downstairs amidst the noise, claimed she saw her mother push him down the stairs. However, the court did not take the 6-year-old girl's words into account. Regardless, after the act, the couple placed Rodriguez's body in the trunk of a previously rented car to dispose of it later. There was also speculation that the man was still alive at that moment. The accomplices then drove the car to a deserted marshland outside the city, placed the body in the driver's seat, doused everything in a flammable liquid, and set it ablaze. Rosa thoughtfully left Pedro's phone at the scene, and upon returning home, she called it several times and sent messages begging for forgiveness and asking him to come back. Remains in a burned car. The morning after the incident, Rosa called her father, Francisco, sobbing into the phone, claiming that she and Pedro had a major argument. She told him that Pedro had ended their engagement, stated he no longer wanted to see her, and drove off in his car without specifying his destination. Rosa also reached out to several of Pedro's close friends and relatives, inquiring if they had seen him. She tearfully narrated their dispute and separation to everyone. For 3 days there was no word from Rodriguez, but on the afternoon of May 4th, a young cyclist riding outside the city stumbled upon a burned vehicle containing human bones. He immediately reported his find to the police, and soon an investigative team was at the scene. The car contained severely charred human remains that were unidentifiable. However, a titanium plate recently implanted in the man's spine helped in identifying him. This implant had a unique serial number, which was used to confirm the remains were Pedro's. Based on the car's location and the nature of the fire, investigators concluded that the vehicle had been intentionally set ablaze, and the driver had either been prevented from escaping or was already deceased at the time of the fire. Given these circumstances, the case was classified as a deliberate act of ending a life. An investigation was launched, the details of which were kept confidential until the trial. Investigation and suspects. Once the remains were identified, police officers were dispatched to Rosa's residence to deliver the tragic news of her fiancé's fate. She attempted to feign shock and grief, but her expression quickly reverted to an indifferent calm as she responded to routine inquiries. Her demeanor was oddly composed for someone who had just been informed of her fiancé's demise. Rosa refused to go to the police station, claiming she had no one to watch her children, and also denied the officers' entry to her home to avoid alarming her daughters. However, she immediately suggested to the officers that her ex-husband, Ruben, could be involved in her fiancé's demise, driven by jealousy. This accusation promptly placed Ruben among the primary suspects, but he soon provided a solid alibi, having spent several days in another city with Antonia, visiting her parents after picking up the girls with Rosa. Rosa herself became a suspect next. Her remarkable calm and detachment raised eyebrows. Yet, aiming to stay ahead, she voluntarily went to the station and suggested her former lover, Albert, as the perpetrator. According to Rosa, he had been harassing her, demanding she break off the engagement with Pedro to marry him instead, and had become enraged and threatening after her refusal. When police arrested Albert as a suspect, he immediately began testifying against Rosa, implicating her as the mastermind and executor of the crime. He disclosed that it was Rosa who had orchestrated the entire plot, including drugging Pedro to incapacitate him, making him an easy target. Rosa was arrested the same day based on this revelation. Trial and sentences. During interrogations, the lovers provided wildly different accounts of the events on that fateful evening. They desperately tried to shift blame onto each other. Their stories were inconsistent, and they struggled to accurately reconstruct the sequence of events. The investigation lasted nearly a year, with law enforcement painstakingly attempting to piece together the crime scene. It became clear that the pair had premeditated the act, indicating it was intentional and planned rather than spontaneous. Despite this, the woman maintained her innocence. She claimed that Albert showed up at her and Pedro's doorstep that evening, armed and irrational. Upon seeing her enraged ex-lover, she fled upstairs, fearing for her daughter's safety and attempting to protect them. At this moment, she alleged, Ferrero carried out the act on her fiancé. Mobile phone data played a crucial role in the investigation. Despite Rosa's belief that they had covered their tracks, investigators discovered she had communicated with her lover using disposable phones on the day of the incident. Additionally, Albert's personal phone was tracked near the location of the burned vehicle on the night of May 1st. The trial of the accused pair didn't begin until February 2020. Despite the woman's attempts to portray herself as a victim, Ferrero's attorney argued that his client only assisted her in disposing of the body, suggesting she was the mastermind behind the entire operation. He described Rosa as a cunning manipulator, capable of using others for her own ends. Antonia, now raising her and Ruben's daughters with him, also testified, reiterating that the older daughter witnessed her mother pushing a bloodied Pedro down the stairs. However, the child's statement was not taken into consideration. Yet, Rosa accused her of lying, claiming Antonia simply wanted to see her imprisoned for as long as possible out of jealousy. In March 2020, both suspects were found guilty of premeditated ending of life and concealing evidence of the crime. Rosa was sentenced to 25 years in prison, while Albert received a 20-year sentence. Additionally, they were ordered to pay nearly 100,000 euros in moral damages to Rodriguez's family. However, as it turned out, all of Rosa's assets were registered in her parents' names, rendering her financially insolvent. Following the verdict, both convicts made numerous appeals, each maintaining their innocence. However, the Supreme Court of Catalonia rejected these appeals, leaving the sentences unchanged. The aftermath for those involved. Rosa's parents, despite the guilty verdict, never believed their daughter was capable of committing such a heinous act. Now, the children's biological father, Ruben Carbo, officially serves as their guardian. He raises the daughters from his previous marriage alongside his wife Antonia, with whom he also has a son. Notably, Ruben has always allowed the girls to maintain contact with their maternal grandparents. Interestingly, following Rosa's arrest in 2017, she was only able to see her daughters nearly 2 years later, in the spring of 2019, under the supervision of Ruben and his current wife. However, he has since refrained from bringing the girls to prison visits, believing the environment adversely affects their mental health. In 2022, it was revealed that Rosa, while incarcerated, attempted to hire someone to end the lives of her ex-husband Ruben and Antonia. Her plan was uncovered, preventing the crime. Rosa claimed that desperation to see her children drove her to this drastic measure. She believed that if Ruben were no longer alive, custody would revert to her parents, who she expected would not obstruct the girls' visits. As for Albert, while serving his sentence, he decided to pursue a law degree, enrolling in a Spanish university. He also dedicated himself to learning foreign languages. The case of Rosa Maria Peral Vinuela inspired a mini-series titled Body in Flames, which premiered on Spanish television in the fall of 2023. Additionally, her story became the subject of a documentary film, Rosa's Ribbons, portraying her as an innocent victim. Monday, September 14, 2015, was remembered by 16-year-old Nolan Buchanan as the best day of his life. The day before, he had spent Sunday with his girlfriend. A traditional morning mass with his girlfriend's family, followed by a get-together with friends and a wonderfully romantic evening. Waking up on Monday morning, next to his favorite girl, the teenager felt like a free, successful, and influential businessman before whom the whole world is open. After all, he was now the owner of Buchanan Construction. The young man was going to inherit cars, a house, land, monetary assets, and made plans how he would manage the family business alone, and certainly do it better than his father, who brought the company to bankruptcy. It would seem that what could go wrong? Already on October 1st, 2015, Nolan Keith Buchanan was arrested at Bonita High School in Bonita, California, by the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. Nolan was incarcerated at the Juvenile Treatment Center, JTC, in South Lake Tahoe until June 13, 2018, when an El Dorado County jury of 7 men and 5 women found Buchanan guilty of 3 charges. The jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. The young man was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole from the 25th year of his sentence. This is how his plan to take over the family business ended. Neighbors and classmates spoke of Nolan as a model kid and a good student. As far as I know, he was a good kid, Anita High School student Campbell Ruxton would later say in an interview. He always cared about school, he seemed very kind, he was very nice. I'm even surprised he was arrested. But what really happened in the Buchanan family? Rather, it was most likely a country cabin where people came to vacation. A Dodge truck and trailer were found on the property adjacent to the cabin. It was possible to run the license plates and find out who the car belonged to. The owner may have been the victim of the wildfire. It didn't take long to find out that the vehicle and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, a company owned by a man named Adam Buchanan. The man in question lived 160 miles from the scene of the accident, about 3 hours away in Bonita, California. This information confirmed the assumption of the police, who decided that the house was just a country residence for those who vacation here from the hustle and bustle of the city. It remained to be seen who was inside, Mr. Buchanan himself or someone else. The name of the owner of the company gave the detectives their first clue, with which they began their investigation. The Bonita police officers were tasked with checking to see if all of Buchanan's family members were well and at home. They went to the correct address and were soon in the Buchanan's driveway, where they noticed a white Ford pickup truck. At a knock on the door, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage came out. He greeted the uniformed officers with surprise and asked what brought them to him. The officers decided to first find out who was in the house so as not to frighten the household. Perhaps the company car had been taken by someone from the company and not the owner himself. Nolan Buchanan said his father Adam had gone away for the weekend to his country estate, 160 miles away, with Molly and their 8-year-old son Gavin, and they were due back in the evening. According to him, his father had left him to look after the house. Investigators did not yet have sufficient A diary was found in which Molly described abuse from Adam. Witnesses interviewed described rough treatment and abuse. According to them, Adam was rude not only to Molly, but also to the children. Molly's mother, Susie Slankard, admitted to investigators, "There were times when I was afraid they would kill each other in one of their arguments." Molly did not sever her relationship with Adam, but would periodically take her son and leave to go to her parents' house and return a few days later until the next fight. It also turned out that the couple liked to hunt in the area where their country house was located. Since everyone was armed, the investigators assumed that during another quarrel, one of the spouses grabbed a gun and shot, and when he realized what he had done, he took his own life. However, there was an inconsistency. If the tragedy happened because of a conflict between husband and wife, it means that near the remains of one of them must necessarily be the instrument of crime, which, however, was not. Investigators speculated that the weapon may have been damaged in the fire and may not have looked as obvious as expected. Over the course of 5 days, forensic team members took turns removing ashes from the home. The search was conducted with surgical thoroughness, but did not yield the expected result. No weapons were found in the house. By this time came the data of forensic examination. The examination confirmed that the DNA of the bodies belonged to Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds before the fire. and the angle of the bullet wounds ruled out the version that someone took their own life. The lack of firearms meant that someone else was in the house, a fourth person who shot the Buchanans, and the investigation had to start over. Police had no choice but to turn to the 16-year-old. Over the weekend, the local high school organized a community cleanup day. The students were clearing debris from a business park just a mile from Adams Construction Company. It was there on September 19th that a small purse with a wallet and identification cards belonging to Molly Nitafe and Adam Buchanan was found under one of the bushes. A .22 caliber rifle was lying nearby. Detectives immediately went to the scene of the discovery. The county sheriff's office made a new assumption. The perpetrator had massacred the Buchanan family with the found rifle and, covering his tracks, had taken their documents from the crime scene. The discovery was important because it meant that someone had traveled all the way to Greenwood to kill the family and then returned to Bonita to dispose of the bag and murder weapon. It appeared to be a Bonita resident. A proximity of the evidence found to the location of Buchanan construction strengthened the theory that the boss was massacred by one of the disgruntled employees. Detectives sent the firearm and the bag of documents for examination, requesting a warrant to inspect the company's records and premises. Here, the investigators got lucky a second time. During the search, they gained access to a video surveillance camera installed on the firm's premises. By happy coincidence, the lens of the camera was directed not at the company's territory, but at the center of the parking lot. After this discovery, the case was just days away from being solved. Since it was already known that the family had gone out of town on Friday, investigators reviewed Friday's footage and were surprised to find that Adam had attached a trailer filled with rocks to a Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had told them. Detectives realized that the young man had deliberately manipulated the investigation. If the white Ford had towed the rock trailer to the cabin, then someone must have driven it back and parked it in the driveway of the Buchanan family home. These conclusions left Elias's parents in complete bewilderment, as their son seemed to be completely healthy and active, and suddenly died of an incomprehensible disease. Following their professional duty, the doctors insisted on conducting an additional forensic medical examination. However, Elias's mother and grandmother, dumbfounded by the loss, refused this procedure. Karen offered to cremate the boy's body, but Elias's mother also refused, preferring to bury her son in a private cemetery so that she could come and lay flowers on his grave. Elias's death was a blow that broke Rolando's heart. He was devastated by the unexpected loss of his youngest son. The caring and loving Karen never left Rolando for a moment. She took care of all the business, carefully supported her boyfriend, and helped him through his pain and grief. Over time, with the warmth and support of the woman he loved, the pain began to subside. 16 months after this terrible tragedy, Rolando decided to take a big step and propose to Karen. They got married, and the man was sure that this woman would always be by his side. However, their happiness turned out to be short-lived. On February 6, 2022, Karen returned home after a beauty salon and working out at the gym, and noticed that Rolando began to experience serious health problems. The next day, February 7th, she found a medical ambulance outside their home. Rolando, 35, suddenly felt very ill. After vomiting profusely, he collapsed in the living room of their home, and the housekeeper called for emergency medical help. The doctors allowed Karen to pass to her husband. When Rolando was taken to the Santa Maria clinic, his condition was critical. Despite the efforts of the medical staff, the young man passed away on February 9th. The cause of his death was severe poisoning. Given that Rolando was a healthy man who was active in sports, the medical staff began to ask questions of his wife. Karen confirmed that Rolando was taking medication to remove dark spots on his skin. For specialists, this information was highly suspicious. Tests revealed a significant excess of calcium oxalate crystals in Rolando's system, which is a characteristic sign of poisoning by ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze for cars. The investigation into this strange and unexpected death of Rolando became a high priority for authorities. The prosecutor's office was actively investigating the neighborhood where the Aquino couple lived. Neighbors became important witnesses, reporting that Karen had repeatedly given her husband some unknown medication. They were aware that she used these medications to go to a party without her husband. However, neighbors also expressed doubts about what happened to Rolando's son, which led investigators to think and consider the theory that Karen may have only wanted to temporarily sedate her husband rather than take his life. However, the findings of the Technology Crimes Unit officers completely ruled out this hypothesis. Requests for various forensic examinations were sent, and Karen, the wife of the deceased, was thoroughly questioned. Many contradictions arose during the interrogation. The investigating officers called on Karen to name the substance she had slipped to her husband before his death. The woman claimed that it was just a skin blemish remedy and that she had administered it through an IV. However, when she was asked to provide a vial of the solution, Karen said that the housekeeper had already thrown the drug away. A further interview was then conducted with the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, who denied Karen's statement regarding the discarded vial. She also reported that she had overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with the medication he was receiving. Karen was detained during the investigation, and her cell phone was seized. Rolando's family, friends, and teammates were shocked by the news of his death. For visitors to the Aquino couple's warehouse and other locals, it was also a shock. No one could understand what had happened or why the father of the family had bid farewell to the world so suddenly. Raul, Karen's ex-husband, was extremely surprised when rumors of a deliberate poisoning began to spread. He claimed that his ex-spouse was always affectionate and never violent towards him. After analyzing the suspect's phone, it was discovered that Karen had searched a search engine for information on the deadliest poisons and how to clear her search history. In addition, records of her 2 ethylene glycol orders from an online store were found. The Agency for Toxic Substances, as well as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, found that it is a synthetic substance that absorbs water and is used in the production of antifreeze. This product is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely dangerous to humans. With the preliminary results of the forensic examination and all the information discovered, the prosecutor's office charged Karen with willfully poisoning Rolando with a poisonous substance diluted with orange juice. Consumption of this beverage caused Rolando's health to seriously deteriorate, and he died. A series of strange and tragic events in the Aquino family forced the authorities to take drastic action. By mid-February, with enough evidence against Karen, an aggravated murder charge was filed. In parallel, suspicions surfaced as to the cause of 9-year-old Elias's death, triggering a new investigation. The prosecutor's office decided to conduct a detailed investigation into the boy's medical history. The mother claimed that Elias was fully healthy and active, and that he had suddenly gone into a coma while at his father's house, from which he never came out. The boy's death certificate indicated that the cause was a malfunction of his internal systems and cerebral thrombosis. However, investigators persistently doubted that Elias, at age 9, could have died of such causes, especially given his overall health. The prosecutor's office requested information about possible purchases of ethylene glycol and received a response confirming that Karen purchased the poison on July 2, 2019, shortly before the boy arrived at the Aquino home. Information from Elias's relatives also confirmed that Karen insisted on cremating his body, but the birth mother rejected the idea and preferred to bury her son. The evidence gathered was enough for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file new aggravated murder charges against Karen on March 4th, related to the poisoning of Elias. On March 14th, a judge ordered pre-trial detention for the woman, who tried to appeal, but the judge rejected it, affirming that she should remain behind bars until the trial began. That trial began 10 months later and was an important step in unraveling this complex and dark story. The long-awaited trial began in the Mendoza Criminal Court, attracting public immediate attention. November 28, 2022 was the beginning of the nationwide trial of Karen OVO. 2 indictments were pending. The first, led by prosecutor Fernando Guzzo, concerned the murder of Elias, and the second, involving Claudia Rios, touched on the murder of Rolando. When the trial began, Rolando's eldest son, Javier Aquino, who was only 15 years old, appeared as a plaintiff, supported by counsel. In addition, Kimberly's own blood was not on the murder weapon or on her hands, which would be impossible if she had actually shot herself in the head with the gun to her chin. but there was a drop of her husband's blood on the thumb of her hand. On top of that, there were several searches on Christopher's work computer for detailed staging of the crime scene. Kimberly's physician also testified at the trial, stating that the young woman suffered from insomnia, headaches, and high blood pressure, for which she was prescribed a number of medications, but that she had no bad thoughts or desire to harm herself or others. The defendant was found guilty on each of the counts charged. For such a horrific crime, Christopher was sentenced to 4 life sentences, 1 for each family member, with no possibility of ever being released. Shortly after such a harsh sentence was handed down, Vaughn unexpectedly stated that he remembered in great detail the events of that day and had not lost his memory at all. According to him, shots rang out after he left the car, but he did not immediately realize what was happening. Then he saw the bodies of the children, and at that moment, his wife shot him in the leg. She shouted that it was all his fault, and then put a bullet in his head. The new testimony of the convict had no effect on the verdict because it sounded more than ridiculous. However, Christopher's parents had been actively trying to justify their son in the eyes of the public. For several years, they regularly take part in all sorts of talk shows, give interviews in blogs and social networks, where they talk about how unhappy in marriage was their heir. They also systematically blame all the troubles on the Phillips family, whose members, according to them, from the very beginning, did not accept their son-in-law and did everything to turn his life into a nightmare.
The prosecution decided to address several questions to Karen. Prosecutor Guzzo, focusing on key points, asked her if Karen had suggested that her son Rolando be cremated. To this question, Karen responded emphatically that the decision on this matter was not up to her, and she had never made any such suggestion. The prosecution called as witnesses relatives of the deceased to reveal further details of what had happened. Soledad, Elias's mother, told the court that after her son's death, Rolando relayed to her Karen's words, in which she suggested that Elias's body be cremated so that both families could keep the boy's ashes. However, Soledad rejected the idea. She also shared her memories of meeting Rolando at the cemetery, where she was told about Karen's jealousy. According to her, Karen even slept in a separate bed, that the relationship between Rolando and Karen was so tainted that the couple slept separately. Another witness was Carolina, the mother of Rolando's first child. She confirmed that, according to her ex-husband, the couple slept separately, but Carolina herself had not had any interaction with Karen prior to the incident. However, on the morning of February 8th, Karen herself called her to inform her that Rolando was sick and in the hospital. Karen told Carolina that her husband had probably taken some medication and was feeling ill. She also asked Carolina to help her unlock her husband's cell phone, claiming that she had suspicions that he was seeing another woman. Carolina was shocked to learn of Rolando's condition, as they had seen each other just a few days ago and he seemed perfectly healthy. She revealed that when she arrived at the hospital, Karen was already there and had gone to see the doctors. Caroline wasn't allowed inside, so she was left waiting. Later, as she was leaving the hospital, Karen told her that no one else was there and everyone had left. This made Caroline very suspicious, and she demanded an explanation from the doctors, to which the doctor announced that the patient had lost consciousness and was not responding to treatment. Caroline then went to the hospital secretary and complained. After talking to Karen, Carolina learned that Rolando had taken medication for skin blemishes, after which he had had an allergic reaction. She claimed that the medication bottle no longer existed because the housekeeper had thrown it away. All these details added to the mystery of this complex case. The trial continued, and now doctors and experts stood before the jury to present forensic evidence and the results of a psychological examination. This evidence threw light on details that had gone unnoticed earlier. Dr. Ivana Marimelli, a pediatrician at the hospital, described how she cared for Elias in July 2019 when the boy was hospitalized. She described that Elias was brought to the medical facility with severe breathing difficulties and urgently required intubation. He also underwent a CT scan which revealed a deep cerebral thrombosis. Elias was given a course of intensive care. The doctor also confirmed that the symptoms that Elias had were consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning. This included impaired consciousness, restlessness, and a subsequent coma accompanied by a blood clotting disorder. Despite the best efforts of medical personnel, the boy's condition worsened, and after 5 p.m. on July 12th, cardiac and respiratory arrest ensued. Doctors tried to resuscitate Elias for 50 minutes with the participation of his father, but all efforts were futile. He was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. The jury also read the results of Karen's psychological examination, conducted at the request of the prosecution. In their findings, the experts emphasized that Karen had lied and concealed the truth. She was presented as a person seeking to create an image of a decent person, but in reality she was characterized as cold and cruel.
In their conclusions, the experts also noted that a psychological examination was conducted immediately after Karen's husband's death, but did not reveal any emotional effects related to the loss of her spouse. This raised doubts about Karen's sincerity and characterized her as a cold-blooded and self-focused woman. The examiners found evidence of latent hostility and impulsive behavioral reactions in Karen. Finally, a prosecutor Guzzo expressed doubt that Karen was a victim of gender-based violence as she portrayed herself in her testimony. All of this information described the true psychological profile of the defendant. The long weeks of tense waiting and continuous court hearings came to a close. The trial brought many people together in the courtroom, their eyes fixed tensely on the jury and the judge, awaiting the decision that would bring justice to this complex and tragic story. The prosecutor, in moving for a judgment of conviction against Karen, assured the jury that all the evidence gathered strongly suggested that she was the one who planned and committed both murders. She purchased ethylene glycol in cold blood, disposed of the packaging, and disguised it as regular juice. Karen watched her loved ones die without providing help in their moment of suffering. Prosecutor Claudia Rios, who was prosecuting Karen's case for Rolando's murder, provided the court with an ethylene glycol purchase sheet paid from Karen's bank account. The prosecution and the plaintiff insisted that the jury reach a unanimous verdict because that would be the only way to achieve justice in the case. They insisted that Karen OVO be found guilty of murder with evidence of extreme cruelty. The defense, on the other hand, insisted that there was insufficient evidence to fully prove her client's guilt. The defense attorney argued that a person can be good or bad, but that it is not always related to the commission of a crime, and that for their client, the death of Rolando and his son was an incredible tragedy and a sad event. However, despite the arguments of the defense, Karen OVO has put herself on the list of Argentine criminals who poisoned their victims. After a long silence and tense waiting for the verdict, the jury made their decision. They handed down a unanimous verdict. Karen OVO was found guilty of killing Elias and committing the crime with particular cruelty. She was also found guilty of Rolando's aggravated death by insidious procedure. Karen, standing in her black outfit with white beads around her neck, listened to the verdict without apparent emotion. The jury reached a guilty verdict. She was awarded a life sentence in prison. Karen OVO, the woman in the dock, tried to escape punishment for the treacherous murders that shook society and left many unsolved questions. Her plans to cremate the bodies of the victims may have been her last attempt to escape the punishment she deserved. However, despite her tricks, the court and jury did not give in and rendered a just verdict. So why did Karen OVO kill her loved ones? That remains a mystery. She had everything she needed to be happy. Perhaps the motive lies in the depths of her own soul, in jealousy, self-interest, pride. Karen refused to admit her guilt, which is why the motives behind this horrific crime remain unclear. Karen OVO will now face long years behind bars, pondering what dark forces may have so badly ruined her and those around her. This is a story that reminds us that even the closest of relationships can hide terrible secrets and mysteries, and that true love and loyalty must always come first.
According to statistics, the number of crimes committed by juveniles has been increasing worldwide in recent years. There has been an upsurge in violence among school children, usually directed at their peers, and the victims are often hospitalized, disabled, or even killed after such incidents. Such hostile acts usually have one goal: to prove their own superiority, power, and permissiveness. Plus, the laws of many countries are lenient to juvenile offenders, which gives them faith in their impunity. The story of a French girl named Agnes Marin, who died at the hands of a high school student, shook the whole country. They studied in a prestigious college with an impeccable reputation in which it seemed nothing like this could not happen. However, as it soon turned out, the perpetrator had attacked the girls before, but his wealthy parents managed not only to keep the case quiet, but also to arrange a son in a good school in another city, hiding the truth about his adventures. It is said that teenage aggression is a form of protest during the period of personality formation and search for oneself. But in our story today, this boy's cruelty was the result of a complete lack of empathy, the ability to empathize and sympathize with others. He was extremely dangerous to society and incorrigible, and therefore became the second teenager in French history to be sentenced to life imprisonment. Who was Agnes Marin? Agnes Marin was born in 1999, November 26th in Paris, and was the only child of the couple Paula and Frédéric Marin. The girl grew up in a fairly well-to-do family. Parents adored their child and sought to give her all the best. Agnes, from an early age, did not know anything to refuse. She was dressed in brand-name stores, taken to the sea, bought expensive toys and gadgets. Marin was an active, sociable, and restless child. She always had a lot of friends and hobbies. She showed creativity, loved music and movies, and in the future dreamed of becoming a film director. At school, she studied well, and teachers noted her high abilities, but often to achieve the best results, she was prevented by banal laziness and inattentiveness. At the age of 13, Agnes got involved with a bad company, which negatively affected the girl's studies and behavior. She started smoking, and not only regular cigarettes, drinking alcoholic beverages and skipping school. Her parents were not in favor of harsh measures of upbringing and several times tried to simply talk to their daughter, but the conversations did not lead to anything. The girl promised to correct herself and to stop communicating with bad company, but she lied. When she was once again caught smoking and drinking beer right on the territory of the educational institution, the question of her expulsion arose. Her parents realized that if their daughter stayed in Paris, she would continue to socialize with people who had a bad influence on her, and nothing would change. Therefore, Frédéric and Paula decided to transfer Agnes not just to another educational institution, but to send her to another city or even a province, away from the capital's bustle and temptations. A new school. After reviewing several options, Marin's parents opted for a closed private college, Savignol, located in the commune of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, which is in the department of Upper Loire region of Auvergne. It is a prestigious educational institution with almost a century of history. The college was founded in the 30s and worked on the principle of boarding school, where children not only studied, but also lived. However, by the end of the 2000s, the college faced serious financial difficulties and was actually teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. In a small community, with a population of only 2,500 people, young people increasingly sought to go to study in the capital or a major city, and therefore the local educational institution experienced a shortage of students and, as a consequence, a shortage of finances. Previously, to get into this college required a high grade point average as well as good characteristics. But even this did not guarantee admission because the competition was several people for one place. However, in 2011, the situation changed dramatically. Due to a large shortage of students, the school, in order not to go completely bankrupt, significantly reduced the requirements for admission, especially if they were children of wealthy parents who were willing to act as sponsors. Despite her behavioral problems, Agnes had a good academic record and grade point average, which allowed her to get into Savignol College, and the authorities simply turned a blind eye to her characteristic. Agnes' parents were happy. They believed that the change would be good for their daughter. She would become more responsible and more easily overcome such a difficult transitional age. Marin was a very sociable, cheerful, and friendly girl. She was able to fit into the new team from the first days. She felt comfortable and quickly made friends. In addition, she showed good progress in her studies, including in new disciplines, which were not available in her previous school in Paris. Her parents visited their daughter at the boarding school every 2 or 3 weeks. They were very pleased with her successes, as well as changes in behavior for the better. Agnes came home to visit only once during her studies. It should be noted that the new school was located on a vast territory surrounded by forest. There were no clear boundaries, fences, and strict security because the crime rate in these parts was considered one of the lowest in the country. To get from the college to the center of the town of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon required no more than a quarter of an hour on foot, so students after school often went there in groups. But before 5 o'clock in the evening, all had to return back. There were disciplinary penalties for breaking the rules. The disappearance of a student. On November 16, 2011, Agnes, together with some of her classmates, decided to take a walk into town after class. There, she met a friend of hers, who studied in another school, but they often crossed paths and constantly called each other. The two girls decided to go shopping and fell behind the general company. A couple hours later, the young people returned to campus, but Marin was not with them. At first, this circumstance did not cause much alarm, and everyone was sure that she would soon return. But the time passed, it began to get dark, and the absence of the student seriously worried the teachers. Her phone was switched off, and she could not be found on campus, so the school management did not hesitate to report the incident to the police. The search began that evening and was conducted by law enforcement officers, teachers, and students of the school. They were divided into groups, each of which combed a different area, but no trace of the missing girl could not be found. No one had seen her and had no idea where she might be.
But everyone hoped that she would return alive and unharmed. Marion's parents were notified almost immediately and asked if their daughter had returned home. Frederick and Paola were shocked at the news and rushed to Le Chambon-sur-Lignon as fast as they could. They assured them that Agnes could not have run away, for she had no reason to do so and had nowhere to go.
According to them, their daughter liked her new school very much. She had made many friends here. She did not feel any discomfort, and she had no conflicts with anyone. The father and mother of the missing Agnes became actively involved in the search. They talked to their daughter's friends, posted pictures of her all over the city asking for help in finding her, and tried to find any clues or leads. What is Agnes's friend hiding? The first thing the police did was to look for people who were the last people to see the missing Agnes and who might have known about her future plans. Girls from her class said that Marin met a friend of hers in the city and went shopping with her, but no one could give her name. However, soon the law enforcers managed to find Estelle, the same friend from another school. The girl was indeed the last person with whom Agnes had been in contact, so she was considered as a very valuable witness. However, she did not provide any useful information at the first interview. She said that Agnes had helped her choose a birthday present for her father. Then they had a milkshake each and said goodbye. Estelle headed for her home, and Agnes had to return to campus. The girl's story sounded plausible, but her behavior seemed a bit odd. She was visibly nervous and seemed to be holding something back. They decided to talk to her again, and suddenly the story she had told began to take on some details that she wanted to keep quiet. Estelle confessed that Agnes had planned to meet a young man that day, a man she had not told her the name of. Allegedly, it wasn't supposed to be a date, but the guys were going to do something bad, apparently taking illegal substances. A couple hours later, Estelle tried to call Agnes, but she didn't answer, and by evening her phone was turned off. The girl admitted that she lied at the first interrogation because Marin asked her not to tell anyone about the meeting with the mysterious guy, and she promised her that. However, when it became known about the disappearance of Agnes, Estelle decided to confess everything because she suspected that the sudden disappearance could be associated with this young man. It has been suggested that Agnes may have simply run away from college. The girl may have fallen in love and is now spending time with her secret boyfriend. Her phone was last online on campus the day she disappeared, but the device was turned off afterward and it was impossible to locate it. Nevertheless, police officers were able to quickly access all data regarding Agnes's calls and correspondence. It was then that the name of a 17-year-old Mathieu Moulinas, a high school student at the same school as the missing Marin, first came to the attention of the police. The first suspect. It turned out that the missing woman for the last few days corresponded with Mathieu Moulinas, but what could connect her with a 17-year-old young man, what interests they could have in common? In any case, the boy had to be questioned because he could have valuable information and shed light on the case. Nothing concrete or alarming in their correspondence could be found, but on the day of Agnes's disappearance, they were really going to meet on campus and walk together. Mathieu promised to show her something, but did not specify what it was. Moulin was first invited to talk to the police on November 17th. He behaved perfectly calm, but there were strange scratches on his face and hands that looked quite fresh. However, the young man admitted that he was dabbling in illegal substances, and yesterday he specifically overdid it, which caused him to lose consciousness and fell into a thorny bush where he lay for several hours. Classmates and educators confirmed that there were indeed problems with this student. Mathieu was admitted to Savenol College in January 2011. His parents transferred him here to supposedly protect him from bad company and problems. However, the young man even here used alcohol and various illegal substances, which raised the question of his expulsion. But he still felt sorry for him and was given time to improve. Moulinas looked like a typical rebel and troubled teenager. It was as if he challenged those around him with his appearance and behavior. He wore Gothic-style clothes, smoked and drank hot drinks right on the campus. He bragged about his antics to his peers, noting that he would not be punished for it. On the day of Agnes's disappearance, Mathieu disappeared for several hours. Toward evening, he came out of the woods in dirty clothes, with scratched face and hands, and to all questions he answered that he had had too much to drink and was passed out. Naturally, it all looked and sounded suspicious, but so far there was no hard evidence against him, and therefore the investigators decided to take a closer look at him. The spoiled son of rich parents. Mathieu Moulinas was born in December 1993 in the municipality of Négué-Solorgues in Garda, and was the eldest of 3 children of the couple Sophia and Dominique Moulinas. He grew up with his 2 younger sisters in a fairly well-to-do family, and from childhood was used to having his every whim immediately fulfilled. From an early age, he was observed some strange things. The boy was quite aggressive, irascible, hard to find a common language with peers, and tried to stay apart from other children. In adolescence, the situation worsened. Mathieu had outbursts of rage, he often started fights, began to drink alcohol regularly, and experimented with all sorts of illegal substances. But at the same time, despite his aggression and antisocial behavior, the young man had a very attractive appearance, thanks to which he became popular with the opposite sex. At the time of the described events in his hometown, he had a girlfriend about whom his parents knew and whom he visited on weekends. Mathieu had a number of records with the police, including the theft of prescription drugs from a pharmacy, which he committed with a friend. But the case was hushed up, probably thanks to money from the teenager's parents. He was also able to get into a prestigious private school with a low-grade point average and problems with the law because his father offered to sponsor the school when it was in crisis. During interrogations, Moulinas behaved defiantly and arrogantly, but remained completely calm so that the police even doubted his involvement in the disappearance of Agnes. The guy was constantly twirling a yo-yo in his hands, his favorite toy, with which he never parted. At the first interrogation, he claimed that he did not know Agnes, but when he was shown a printout of their correspondence, he began to change his testimony, trying to lie on the fly, but quickly became confused in his own words. According to the guy, he promised to show Agnes a clearing in the forest where mushrooms grow. Allegedly, they used them together, and after Mathieu became ill, and he fell into a thorny bush where he lay until the evening, and when he woke up, he saw that Marin was not. He didn't go looking for her, but just went back to the campus because it was getting dark. A lawyer hired by the parents of the Moulinas was present at all the interrogations and recommended that his young ward show the place where he had last seen Agnes and where they, according to him, used mushrooms. However, Mathieu said that he would not be able to find that clearing because they stumbled on it by accident, and he got out of there on autopilot,
not really understanding where he is and what is happening around. But Mathieu's words were soon refuted by experts who found no traces of mushroom ingestion in his blood. Moreover, the scratches on his body were recognized as a consequence of a struggle. That is, someone scratched him with nails, and apparently, it was a girl. A gruesome discovery in the thicket. The students of the school who had seen Mathieu coming out of the woods that evening pointed out the direction from which he had appeared, and it was in that part of the woods that it was decided to make a large-scale, thorough search. At that time, there was still a faint hope of finding Marin alive, but on November 18th, searchers awaited a terrible discovery. In a small clearing, hidden in a dense thicket, was found badly mutilated and partially charred body of the missing Agnes. Her clothes were torn, her underwear was missing. There were all the signs of violence, as well as traces of penetrating stab wounds. Doubt that this heinous crime committed by Moulinas, no one had no doubt, but it was necessary to wait for the conclusion of forensic experts, as well as to obtain confessions from the killer himself. Actually, when Mathieu was told about the terrible discovery, he did not particularly repudiate and began to testify, telling how everything was. Confessions of a ruthless killer. The strangler confessed that he deliberately lured Agnes into the woods to abuse her, but allegedly did not plan to kill her. However, she put up fierce resistance, scratched him, so he had to tie up the victim using the rope from his favorite toy, yo-yo, which he carried with him everywhere. Agnes screamed and threatened to turn him into the police, which pissed the guy off. Going to prison he did not want to, and therefore decided to kill the unfortunate and get rid of the body. Mathieu brutally beat Agnes, breaking her arm, nose, several ribs, and shin, and then gave her 17 stab wounds, most of which came to the neck, face, and chest. When the victim stopped showing signs of life, he doused her with a flammable mixture from a canister and set her on fire, hoping that the fire would completely destroy the body. Then he quickly left, because it started to get dark, and he did not see that the fire was soon extinguished. He took his toy off the dead body and took it with him. The high school student told about the incident calmly and in detail, as if savoring every word and watching the reaction of the detectives. He felt no remorse or pity for the victim. The examination confirmed that under the fingernails of Agnes were particles of skin and epithelium Mathieu, and in her body revealed traces of biological fluid of the rapist. Also on the rope of the very toy yo-yo found sweat traces of both the perpetrator and the victim. After all the necessary studies and medical conclusions, Agnes's body was given to her parents, who buried their only daughter in Paris. It is noteworthy that the funeral took place on November 26, 2011, on her birthday. The first victim of a young psychopath. When law enforcers thoroughly took up the biography of Moulinas, they were shocked by the fact that Marin was not his first victim, but this information was carefully tried to hide. As it turned out, he had been cruel to others since childhood, bullying animals, other children, and even his own sisters. He always took an incomparable pleasure in hurting others and watching them suffer. In August 2010, Mathieu attacked his young neighbor Julia, with whom he knew since childhood. The girl showed interest in the handsome neighbor, and he decided to take advantage of it. The guy lured her into the woods, where he hit her on the head, and while the victim was disoriented, tied her up with Scotch tape taken from the house, and then abused the unfortunate. Moulinas then began to strangle her and probably would have killed her, but suddenly her cell phone rang. The perpetrator recoiled, looked around, and simply left the scene. A terrified Julia managed to free herself and called her parents, who immediately reported the incident to the police. Mathieu was arrested the same day. During interrogations, he cried, trying to appease the police, and also made attempts to shift all the blame on the victim, claiming that she herself provoked him, teasing and hinting at intimacy. But law enforcers understood that he had prepared for the crime in advance, and even took duct tape with him to immobilize the victim. Nevertheless, despite the gravity of the crime, Mathieu was not punished.
The court took into account the very young age of the perpetrator and instead of prison sent him for compulsory treatment in a psychiatric clinic, where he spent only 4 months. All this time, psychologists and psychiatrists worked with him and evaluated his condition. In December 2010, the chief specialist, who was in charge of Molinas, gave a conclusion that he was fully rehabilitated, and after the course of therapy, he no longer posed any threat to others. The court, after reading this report, released the offender, requiring him only to attend several anger management sessions. Parental patronage. It is worth noting that the Molina couple also put a lot of effort into getting their son released. They promised the judge that Mathieu would leave the region and not cause any more trouble, and they also said that they would make sure that the heir would undergo therapy. They hired the best lawyers who did everything possible to keep their client out of jail. After that, the parents started looking for a new school for their son, but since he had a criminal record for such a serious article, they did not want to accept him anywhere. Then the father personally went to the provincial closed college Savinol and made an appointment with the director. He knew about the financial problems of the institution and immediately offered to sponsor him. When it came to the admission of Mathieu to the college, the director noted that the guy is too low academic performance, and the criminal case of a potential student could hit hard on the reputation of the school. But Dominic Moulinas, in every possible way, vindicated his son, lying that there was no violence, just his ex-girlfriend so tried to get back at him after the breakup. Allegedly, that's why he was released a few months later, when everything was sorted out. Surprisingly, but the leadership of the educational institution did not go into the details of the trial and accepted the version told by Dominic. Apparently, the amount of sponsorship he had announced played a decisive role, and they simply turned a blind eye to the crime and withheld this information from other students and their parents. The trial and the verdict. Mathieu had taken Agnès' life only a month before he turned 18. However, he was a minor at the time of the violent and brutal crime, and therefore the law provided for a lighter sentence for such offenders, and the trial itself had to be held in private. Agnès' parents insisted on making the sessions open, at least partially, with the involvement of journalists who would cover the case in the media. However, the Marin couple were refused, and the trial was held behind closed doors. The proceedings began only on June 18, 2013. The public prosecutor harshly criticized the numerous omissions in the case of Mathieu, in particular, the fact that the psychiatrist who gave the conclusion that the guy is not a threat to others was a young girl who did not have the proper qualifications. She had no previous experience with criminals and made a fatal mistake. The defendant underwent a second psychiatric examination, and experts concluded that not only is he unrepentant, but he may well commit a similar crime again if given the opportunity. Mathieu himself confirmed this, stating that he enjoyed watching the victims suffer. Moulins was diagnosed with symptoms of schizoid and paranoid disorder, which together with outbursts of uncontrolled aggression made him extremely dangerous to others. However, he was fully aware of his actions and could be held responsible for them before the law. Moreover, the prosecutor insisted that the young man be tried as an adult due to the brutality of his crime, and his request was eventually granted. On June 28, 2013, Mathieu was found guilty of abuse and murder with particular cruelty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and forced psychotherapy. He became the second juvenile offender in French history to receive such a harsh punishment. Moulinas' lawyers decided to appeal the sentence, but on October 10, 2014, a jury of appeals upheld the life sentence, ending any possibility of a review of the decision. In 2016, Mathieu's parents wrote and published a book in which they described their bitter experience and admitted that their son remains unrepentant.
19-year-old student Lizzy Marriot vanished on October 9, 2012. After her classes, she went home and left a note on the table. It was addressed to Tony and Becky Hanna, the uncle and aunt of the girl where she was staying. In it, Lizzy said she was going to visit a friend and would be back no later than midnight. However, neither on that day nor the next did the niece return. Later, her car was found in the campus parking lot. The girl seemed to have disappeared without a trace. After some time, the search for the missing girl turned into a search for her body. The police became aware of the gruesome details of her death. Once the girl's openness and friendliness turned against her. This is a story about the danger posed by uncontrolled desires. Horrible crimes are committed when not only state, but also universal laws are violated. The freedom of one person ends where the rights of another begin. This is an undeniable truth. For Tony and Becky, their niece became a full-fledged family member. To save on housing, she moved in with them during her studies at the University of New Hampshire. Lizzy loved marine animals very much, so she chose a future profession in marine biology. She moved to Chester in the fall of 2012, leaving her parents Bob and Melissa Marriot, with whom she lived in Massachusetts. They were separated by a 2-hour drive, but they still maintained close communication. The girl had a gentle character, was kind and sweet, which made everyone love her. She would shout, "I'm home," her aunt recalled, and we felt joy in our hearts because she felt comfortable with us. And we with her. Lizzy liked her new life, and unprecedented horizons lay ahead. In her spare time, she worked at Target, where she quickly adapted and was well regarded. There, she met 18-year-old Kate McDonald. The girls quickly found a common language, often hanging out after work. Once Lizzy was already at Kate's apartment, so when she invited her again, she agreed. On October 9th, the friends met. They wanted to spend the evening together, have dinner, and watch a movie. However, their solitude was interrupted. 30-year-old Seth Mazzella, Kate's boyfriend, joined them. The heroine didn't mind the company. It's more fun together. Moreover, her new acquaintances were interesting personalities involved in theater, and Seth graduated from the same university as Lizzy, but in theater arts. Despite the fact that the guy worked as a consultant in an electronics store, he had a rich experience. He trained as an emergency medical technician, earned a black belt in karate, and even taught martial arts. In general, they had a lot to talk about. The evening promised to be interesting and end on a good note. It's just that, answering the young people's apartment, the girl never came out again. After Lizzy didn't return by the promised time, her relatives decided to wait until the evening of the next day. Perhaps she stayed overnight at a friend's and went from there to the university. However, when she didn't show up and on October 10th, the aunt and uncle got worried and contacted her parents. It turned out they also had no information. After the unpleasant news, the mother and father got in the car and headed to Chester. On the way, they reported their daughter's disappearance. Not only the police and relatives, but also the girl's friends joined the search. The investigation began with questioning everyone who knew her. Unfortunately, the relatives didn't know where Lizzy had gone. However, thanks to her friends, this information was established. Nate McNill, a friend, said he knew where she might be and pointed to Kate McDonald. He also said he asked Kate if she had Lizzy and she said no. Detectives took note of the guy's words and started checking the new information. Meanwhile, it was found that there were no movements in the girl's bank accounts, and her phone was turned off. The initial version that she might have been in an accident was ruled out. Just a few days later, her car was found. At the same time, Bob and Melissa Marriott announced a $10,000 reward for anyone who could provide information about their daughter's whereabouts. After talking to Lizzy's friends and colleagues, investigators learned interesting information about Kate and her boyfriend. The couple was far from what they tried to appear in public. Soon after, Seth Mazzella was arrested. Lizzy and Kate's acquaintances said that recently the girls had been spending a lot of time together. However, they seemed different in character and attitude toward life. Lizzy was very sociable and compassionate, while Kate, on the contrary, was reserved and rude. What brought them closer was unclear. Those who had been working at the store for years said that this was not always the case with McDonald. After she started a relationship with Seth, she changed a lot. There was no trace of her former cheerfulness and lightness. As it turned out later, she even limited communication with her relatives, since they were against her new boyfriend. There was something suspicious about him, antisocial. The couple started dating when the girl was 17. After she turned 18, they moved in together and began living in Mazella's apartment in Dover, New Hampshire. Paying special attention to the couple, the police checked their databases, but found nothing remarkable. Studying the profiles of young people on the internet, officers learned some details about their personal lives. Sanath and Kate practiced not quite traditional relationships. On one of the websites, McDonald, under the pseudonym Miss Scarlet Vampire Actress, posted a spicy ad. She wrote that she and her lord were looking for a live-in slave. The required duties were house cleaning, dishwashing, laundry, cooking, and readiness for intimacy at any time. The girl also shared a bit about herself and her partner. She described their relationship as dominant, submissive, where the former dictates and controls, and the latter completely submits to his will. At the end, the girl attached her photos in a Gothic style. From the text, it was clear that the feelings of the two were not based on love and respect, but rather on humiliation and obedience. The couple practiced BDSM, where Seth was the dominant and Kate was the submissive. Now detectives had no doubts that they could be involved in Lizzy's disappearance. On October 12th, the young people were summoned for questioning. They were questioned simultaneously, but separately from each other. This played into the hands of the investigation. For 2 hours, Kate insisted that she hadn't met Lizzy on October 9th. After that, she refused to talk altogether. Meanwhile, Seth was more talkative. He denied his friend's words and said that on that day Marriott was indeed at their place. However, a tragedy occurred. At first, everything was fine. They watched a movie, played strip poker. After that, they engaged in a threesome. According to him, no one objected to intimacy and was morally prepared. During the process, he tied the girls with ropes, but at some point something went wrong, and Lizzy accidentally died. Then, in a state of shock and fear of being misunderstood, he and Kate took the girl's body to Pierce Island and threw it into the Piscataqua River. After that, they went home. After an 11-hour interrogation, Mazzella went with the police to the designated place, where he vividly demonstrated how he got there and threw the body off the cliff. On October 13th, the guy was charged with murder. The news of their daughter's death was devastating for her parents. Melissa Marriott said she had a feeling about it, but she didn't want to believe it until the last moment. On the same day, a candlelight vigil was held in memory of the departed. Her father thanked those who came and said that the prayer spoken today would help Lizzy find peace. "She has become an angel who flew to heaven," said Bob Marriott. Her friend Nate, who actively participated in the search for the girl, remembered that she always told funny stories, so she could lift spirits or comfort in difficult times. "Perhaps she would have found something to say to us in this case too," he sadly said. The girl's parents refused to accept the version of death told by Mazzella. They explained that their daughter was in a relationship and cherished it very much. According to them, she would never betray her beloved Brittany. They prayed to God and asked the police to find the poor girl's body as soon as possible, to say goodbye to her like humans, and bury her. The search went on every day. Volunteers joined the efforts of the authorities. Even a private detective was working on it. However, the river, which became Lizzy's final resting place, is subject to strong tides and ebbs. It is quite possible that she has long been carried into the Atlantic Ocean. The investigation continued. A search took place in Mazzella's apartment and beyond. It is worth noting that the young couple's house was not clean and orderly. Chaos reigned everywhere. Detectives also found out that Seth was interested in occultism and black magic. Since no evidence was found in the apartment, forensic experts examined the surrounding area. In one of the trash containers, they found a bag of belongings. Among them were black leather gloves, a sweatshirt, and men's underwear. During the examination, it was established that the underwear had DNA traces belonging to Seth and Lizzy. This confirmed the intimate nature of their relationship. and the sweatshirt belonged to the deceased and was identified by her family. But what were leather gloves doing on this list? If it's a love game accessory, why get rid of it, like the rest of the evidence? Apparently, not everything in Mazzella's words was true. He could easily pass off the desired as reality. However, what Kat McDonald said confirmed it. The girl broke her silence, and on October 17th, she told what happened. She admitted that on October 9th, Lizzy came to her. Later, Seth joined them. At first, the three of them watched a movie, then played strip poker. In the process of the game, they got excited and decided to have intimate relationship. According to her, everyone's desire was mutual. It all started with kisses and tenderness. Then Seth suggested tying Lizzy up with ropes, and she agreed. The girl even showed schematically how Seth did it. Everything was going well, but suddenly, Marriot had a seizure. She began to suffocate, and moments later, she lost consciousness. When Seth and Kat lifted the girl, she wasn't breathing. Everything happened quickly and unexpectedly. McDonald claimed that no one was to blame for what happened. It was an accident. However, a significant role in the investigation was played by the testimony of an unexpected witness. One day, a young woman went to the police station. She said she had important information about Lizzy Marriot's case and asked to speak to the detectives leading the investigation. During the conversation, she introduced herself as Catherine Fish, Seth Mazzella's ex-girlfriend. From the conversation, it became clear what she was hinting at. Seth was capable of murder. Once he confessed to her that in one of his fantasies, he takes someone's life. But let's start from the beginning. Catherine and Seth met about 10 years ago. At first, he seemed attentive and caring. He courted her beautifully, didn't skimp on flowers and gifts. He was very charming in conversation. The girl quickly fell in love with the affable young man, but at the moment of their first intimacy, she learned that he was into BDSM. At first, she didn't mind new sensations, as long as he kept himself under control. However, later, Seth began to show excessive cruelty and dominance. He didn't want to be contradicted or stopped. Sometimes he shared his thoughts and fantasies with her. During one such conversation, Catherine heard a terrible confession. Then she realized he could be dangerous. As if to confirm this, he grabbed her by the throat very tightly once. The girl begged him to let go, but he wouldn't stop and continued to squeeze harder. This incident finally shattered her illusions. Since they moved to another city, the girl didn't know where to go to get away from him. She didn't know anyone and didn't communicate with anyone. Besides, she was financially dependent on her boyfriend, so she continued to live with him, waiting for a convenient moment to escape. Catherine admitted that over time, Seth started talking about a third partner. He got bored with her in bed, so he decided to spice things up. Therefore, he periodically brought different girls to their house. But none of them stayed long. So Mazzella said they needed to find a permanent girlfriend. Catherine's life turned into hell. Catherine admitted that Seth had frightened her so much that she didn't dare to escape. After a few months, gathering courage, she finally decided to run away. Fish miraculously overcame the distance of 1,000 miles to get to her parents' house. But that's another story. She never saw her ex-boyfriend again. In May 2014, Seth Mazzella appeared in court. The prosecution believed that the defendant was guilty not only of intentional murder, but also of taking advantage. Several people testified against him. Shortly before the trial, among them was Kat McDonald. 2 months after Lizzy's death, she too was arrested and was in custody. She was charged with obstruction of justice and investigation. The girl had plenty of time to analyze what had happened and understand whom she was covering for. Initially, while behind bars, she and Seth were actively corresponding. The lovers dreamed of escaping and going to another country where there were no extradition laws. They wanted to get married and have children. However, their escape plans suffered a setback. In the winter of 2012, Seth persuaded his cellmate Ryan Bachman, who was soon to be released. Mazzella gave him access to his bank account. Bachman was supposed to withdraw money, buy drugs with it, and sell them, thereby increasing the initial capital. With this amount, they planned to buy weapons, 2 cars, explosives, and a boat. However, the friend decided to use the money for his own purposes. Moreover, authorities learned about the plan. After that, Seth abandoned the escape plan and sent Kat a letter suggesting they meet in the afterlife. He sincerely believed that death was not the end of life. Perhaps, in this way, he hinted to the girl about ending her life. In any case, time helped MacDonald. Her thoughts cleared up. Therefore, when in 2014 the prosecutor's office offered her a favorable deal, she agreed without hesitation. According to it, the suspect had to tell the truth about what happened in the apartment on the evening of October 9th. In return, the threatened 20-year prison sentence was reduced to 3, a fairly advantageous offer, considering the circumstances that became known to the investigation afterward. The girl admitted that she was very afraid of Seth and obeyed him in everything. He gradually suppressed her will, deprived her of independence. A month and a half before the tragedy, the guy sent her a message ordering her to find a third partner as soon as possible, because he didn't want to be alone while Kat was away. The thing is, the girl had 10-day theater tours scheduled. However, MacDonald never found a replacement for herself. Over time, the tone of Mazzella's messages changed. From orders, he moved on to threats, and promised a terrible retribution if she didn't do what he wanted. At the very least, Kat had to bring one of her friends with whom he could carry out his plan. To fulfill the order, Kat invited Lizzy over. She agreed easily because she had been a guest at her place once and trusted her. And to ensure that the girl came without hesitation, MacDonald kept silent about the fact that they wouldn't be alone. Seth liked the presumed partner. He had seen her photos before, so he eagerly awaited the appointed hour. Imagine the disappointment and anger the guy felt when the evening didn't go as planned. On October 9th at 9 p.m., Marriott arrived at Mazzella's apartment. At first, Kat and Lizzy spent time together, chatting. Then Seth joined them. He was cheerful, joked a lot, and took care of the girls. In general, he brightened up the evening. After that, the young people started watching the movie. During the viewing, Seth suggested playing strip poker, dimming the lights in the room. He wanted to create a conducive atmosphere for intimacy. The game was casual, but Lizzy was losing, so she ended up in her underwear. In another losing hand, Seth suggested kissing Kat, but the girl refused, explaining that she was already in a relationship and it repulsed her. After a while, the heated guy suggested Marriott to be alone, to which she categorically replied no. In response to her reaction, Seth went to his room, where he put on black leather gloves and took out a rope. After that, he returned and sat behind Lizzy. When Seth slipped the weapon over her neck, the unsuspecting girl didn't even have time to scream. He strangled the girl without blinking an eye. Then the murderer carried out his plan and violated the body of the deceased. All this time, his girlfriend sat nearby and silently watched. Kat explained that she was very scared. She was afraid of becoming the next victim, so she did nothing to help the poor girl. Around 1 a.m, the couple wrapped Lizzy's body in tarpaulin and put it in a suitcase, which they carried to Lizzy's car. Then they headed to Pierce Island by the river there, where they lifted the suitcase onto an observation deck, pulled out the dead Marriott, and threw her off the cliff. Then they cleaned up in the car together, drove to campus, and left the girl's car in the parking lot. The couple walked 10 miles home. Kat explained that she was scared by what was happening and was in a state of shock. And later, she didn't want to testify against the guy because she knew he wouldn't have any trouble getting rid of her. During the trial, the girl kept sobbing constantly, but not a single tear fell from her eyes. Because of this, many in the courtroom doubted her sincerity. She was a good actress and could easily pretend to be miserable. This caught the attention of Seth's lawyer. He claimed that the girl could professionally transform into any role. The defendant's defense insisted that Lizzy died accidentally during intimacy. At the same time, no one denied that Seth and Kat got rid of her by disposing of the body. MacDonald's defense, on the other hand, argued that Kat had been under pressure for a long time, which had shaken the girl's mental state. McDye essentially limited her communication with family and friends, constantly controlling and coercing her into intimacy. The prosecution focused on deliberate murder, emphasizing the discovered gloves. According to the prosecutor, Mazzella knew what he was going to do with Lizzy, so he deliberately put them on. He did it to protect himself and hide the traces. Considering all the circumstances, his action was by no means accidental. Witnesses for the prosecution also included Roberta Gherkin and Paul Hickok, acquaintances of the couple. It turns out that at 10:49 p.m. after Marriot's murder, Seth called them. He said he needed help and asked them to come over. After 11 p.m., they appeared at Mazzella's apartment and saw a strange scene. Seth was sitting on the bed, and a girl in lingerie lay next to him. When Paul asked what was going on, Seth replied, "This time things went too far." He repeated this phrase over and over again. Roberta found Kat on the kitchen floor. The girl was sitting in the fetal position and rocking back and forth. The arriving couple immediately said to call an ambulance and quickly left. They didn't interfere and didn't call the police because they didn't want any extra trouble. On August 14, 2014, Seth Mazzella was found guilty of first-degree murder by strangulation, taking advantage in criminal conspiracy. The 32-year-old man was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. 20-year-old Kat McDonald received the promised 3 years of imprisonment. It is known that in 2016, the girl was released. She does not maintain any social networks, at least not under her own name. Some believe she returned to her parents. Lizzy Marriot's body was never found. The girl's parents couldn't bury their daughter, so they made a small memorial for her in the form of a bench by the lake in their hometown. Bob and Melissa Marriott believe that the sentence is too lenient for Lizzy's former friend. Although the perpetrator is punished, they cannot call it justice. The girl is dead and will never return. However, her case can serve as an example for other women. A wolf in sheep's clothing. The Roman poet Decimus Junius Juvenal once said, "There is scarcely a litigation in which the cause of the quarrel is not a woman. Times change, but morals remain the same, and not everyone may agree, but whatever happens, a lot of it comes down to the female gender. Often behind every twisted story is a woman." In the fall of 2001, another gruesome event rocked Oklahoma City. The city is in the heart of a deeply religious belt. The so-called Bible Belt of the United States is known as a hotbed of religious and conservative values. At the same time, this part of America is known for its high rates of crime, divorce, and teen pregnancy. The cold-blooded crime that occurred in Andrew's family, saddening and outraging the faith community, added to the unfortunate list. No breaks. One rainy October morning, a strange phone call rang in the office of Robert Andrew, senior vice president of a well-known advertising company. The man on the other end of the phone identified himself as a doctor at a local hospital. The unidentified man reported that Brenda, Mr. Andrews' wife, was in critical condition. In a panic, Rob rushed to his car, started the engine, and headed for the clinic. On the way, he noticed that when he pressed the brake pedal, the vehicle would not stop. After running a red traffic light, he successfully pulled over to the side of the road. The car stopped. Miraculously surviving, he called a cab. When he got to the hospital, he learned that his wife was not a patient. When Rob took the car to a repair shop, the technician told him that the brake hoses had been cut. The unfortunate man was speechless with surprise. Someone had obviously wanted to take his life and had come up with a good reason to drive the car. But who was capable of such an act? Putting all the details together, Rob headed to the police station. He informed law enforcement officials that someone had tried to take his life, and apparently, he had a pretty good idea who it was. The inseparable couple. Robert and Brenda were married for about 17 years. The couple had 2 beautiful children during their marriage. The couple were very religious, so they raised their children in faith and morals. Together, they attended church, were engaged in charity. To the average person, their union seemed happy and reliable, however. In October 2001, their family ship went down. Mrs. Andrew left her husband and filed for divorce. Good Girl Brenda. Brenda Evers was born on December 16, 1963 in Enid, Oklahoma. The girl's parents were devout Christians. They gathered around the table for meals together, held group prayers, and attended the parish. Brenda grew up a quiet and peaceful child. She did well in school. She spent most of her time at church helping others. When many of her peers were dating guys, she waited for the one and only for life. In high school, the girl was a cheerleader for the soccer team. She was very fond of dancing, but never participated in parties. In general, in her younger years, Brenda was a model of piety and modesty, like her mother. By the way, she wanted to be like her mother in everything. Therefore, after marriage, she intended to become a housewife and devote herself to her husband and children. First, love. At the age of 17, the girl met Rob Andrew, the older brother of her friend. He was older and studied at one of the state universities. Young people began to communicate. It turned out that they had a lot in common, despite the fact that the guy was a Baptist and Brenda was a Lutheran. The two of them had conservative views on life, attended church, and dreamed of creating a large and friendly family, so the friendly relationship grew into a romantic one. After a while, the girl entered college in Winfield, Kansas. Despite the distance of 125 miles between them, the couple actively kept in touch. Eventually, to be closer to her lover, a year later Brenda transferred to a university in Ohio in Stillwater. Close to the summer of 1984, the lovers became husband and wife, metamorphosis. Soon, Robert received a tempting job offer in Houston, Texas. The man doubted the decision, but Brenda convinced her spouse. While he was building a career as an advertising manager, she managed to get a degree and get a job in banking. Mrs. Andrew fell in love with the tall buildings of the city, nightclubs, and busy life. Texas changed the young woman. She got rid of her excessive modesty. She began to take care of herself, wear fashionable clothes, makeup, made a large circle of friends. Her husband was not very pleased with his wife's transformation. He thought that a believing woman should be more restrained. Besides, Rob was homesick. Therefore, when he was offered to return to the advertising agency in Oklahoma City, he gladly agreed. However, Brenda did not support her spouse. They even quarreled on this ground. Then still came to a compromise. The couple agreed that Robert will settle in a new place and find a suitable house. And if everything works out well, the wife will join him. A few months they lived separately from each other. Subsequently, the family was reunited. In the early 1990s, the Andrew couple settled in a luxurious house in the prestigious neighborhood of Landsbrook, and 9 months later they had a daughter, Tricity. Brenda even quit her job to become a housewife and engage in child rearing. 4 years later came son Parker. It seemed that there came a family idyll. For this, they had everything: love, children, home, and financial prosperity. What happened in Mrs. Andrews' garage? On November 20th, 2001, a few days before Thanksgiving, Rob planned to stop by Brenda's house. He had made arrangements with her in advance to take the children with him for the holidays. At the time, the couple was divorced. In the evening, his ex-wife met him on the doorstep of the house. She asked the man to go to the garage and help with the faulty equipment. When he bent down, he heard footsteps behind him. Robert turned toward the noise. A gunshot rang out and the wounded man fell to the concrete floor. Around 6 p.m., the emergency services received a call. The caller turned out to be Brenda Andrew. She reported that she was injured and her husband was dead. An ambulance immediately rushed to the scene. When the paramedics arrived, they found a horrific scene. In the garage, in a pool of blood, lay a man whose cause of death was a gunshot wound. His wife was luckier, shot in the arm. Brenda's clothes were stained with blood, and the woman herself looked remarkably detached. The paramedic put her condition down to shock. "I tried to give Rob first aid, but I think he's dead," she reported. The victim's hand was bandaged, and she was later taken to the hospital. As the ambulance left the scene, police began their examination. The first thing they found was a .22 caliber bullet lodged in the wall. A little while later, a shotgun shell casing was found, so multiple weapons were used in the attack. The second thing the officers noticed was the victim's wallet. He still had it on him. So the shooting wasn't connected to a robbery. To understand what happened, it was necessary to interview Mr. Andrews' ex-wife. At the clinic, Brenda explained the reason for their meeting. She also explained that while they were busy, 2 masked armed men entered the garage. The thugs shouted something in their direction, but what exactly she couldn't hear. One of them then shot Rob twice, and the other wounded her as she was about to flee. After that, the attackers hurriedly fled. Who the attackers were and what they had come for was not known to her. However, the victim added that Robert could hardly have enemies, as he was a decent and kind person, always helping other people. The woman admitted that she was frightened by what happened, especially the fact that there were children in the house at the time of the attack. However, many things in her words were contradictory. It was clear to the police that Brenda was not telling the truth, especially the fact that the children were not packed for the trip. Interviews with neighbors yielded no positive results. None of them had noticed anything strange that fateful evening. Hoping to find out the details of Brenda and Robert's personal life, the detectives decided to question the couple's acquaintances. Midlife crisis. It turns out that after the birth of their second child, the relationship between the couple became strained. Mr. Andrew repeatedly told friends and pastor that Brenda was abusive to him, and repeatedly stated that she hated their marriage. Ronnie Stump, a friend of Robert's who was a frequent visitor to the bereaved family, said he thought their feelings were abnormal. Brenda was not shy about her expressions even in the presence of strangers, and Rob clearly loved the woman more than she deserved, as he forgave her antics for quite a long time. Friends of the family unanimously claimed that she had undergone a strange metamorphosis. From an ordinary housewife, she turned into a woman of easy behavior. These accusations were not unfounded. There was a lot of evidence to support them. Brenda was clearly going through a midlife crisis. Her style of dress had changed. The once sophisticated woman began to dress vulgarly and brightly painted. But it didn't stop there. Mrs. Andrew became very secretive to her husband. She did not tell him where and with whom she spent time, what she was doing. Soon, Robert became aware of his wife's affairs on the side. In October 1997, she began a relationship with Rick Nunley, the husband of a friend. The man was Brenda's co-worker while working at an Oklahoma bank. The couple dated for a year, and afterward had an occasional phone relationship. Later, another lover was local store owner James Higgins. At first, he was only impressed by the frank outfits and flirting, and after from the hands of Brenda, received the keys to the hotel. The man went about skillful seductress, and met with her 1-2 times a week. This affair lasted about 5 years. All this time, Rob remained in complete ignorance. However, he realized that their marriage is cracking at the seams. In addition, his wife practically stopped talking to him and spending time. He hoped that everything will eventually get better and tried with all his might to keep the family. In 2001, Brenda stopped the relationship with Higgins, but not for the sake of her husband and the holy bonds of marriage. She was sinking more and more into the abyss of debauchery and vice. Fatal love. 2 years earlier, a Baptist church had sprung up in Oklahoma City, largely due to Mr. Andrews' contributions. In it, the man became a deacon, and his wife took the position of Sunday school teacher. From the outside, their family looked prosperous, adhering to morals and traditions. At that time, Brenda had not completely lost the image of a model wife. She gladly taught the children the basics of religion and fellowship. There, she met James Pavitt, a new lover. He was also a part-time school teacher, married and generally religious, and was friends with Rob. However, he too could not resist the charms and dazzling smile of Brenda. In the spring of 2001, they began to meet. At first, they did it secretly, but then, having lost the limits of prudence, they stopped hiding their feelings. Everyone in the church saw their sympathy for each other. Rob suspected his wife of infidelity and had a big fight with her. They separated. Just by this time, James had divorced his wife. Rob still dreamed of restoring the family, but Brenda was adamant and even filed for divorce. Just after this event, there was a strange call to Mr. Andrews' office, and then a shocking car malfunction. In making an attempt on his life,
Rob suspected the Sweet couple, which he reported to the police. What could have caused such thoughts in an open and ingenuous man? The same question was asked by law enforcement officials. Rob did not prevent the divorce. The agreement on children was reached. He helped Brenda financially. What else was there not to please a cheating husband? It was all about the money. In addition to teaching school, James Pavitt was an insurance agent. In the summer of that year, he took out an $800,000 insurance policy on Mr. Andrew. Brenda was the sole beneficiary. It's about the insurance. When officers began investigating the bizarre attack on Mr. Andrew's family, in addition to the relationship between the couple, they also became aware of the incident involving the car's brakes. Detectives compared the facts. Brenda's involvement in the murder of her husband became clearer. In addition, there was a new suspect in the case, her newfound lover. Then investigators learned that 2 weeks before the incident in the garage, Rob Andrew paid a visit to the insurance company. He wanted to exclude his unfaithful wife from his insurance policy. However, James refused to do so, citing that the contents of the contract could only be changed by the beneficiary himself, that is, Brenda Andrew. Not taking his former friend's word for it, Rob decided to verify the information with management. It turned out that Brenda and James had attempted to forge the insurance policy by transferring ownership to Mrs. Andrew. Rob's signature was falsified, plus it was dated retroactively. Mr. Andrew was assured by Pavitt's superiors that he still owned the policy, and only the policyholder could change the terms of the contract. When James learned of the incident, he was very angry, as the circumstances discovered were the reason for his dismissal. Investigation. Officers also became aware that Robert was in possession of a 16-gauge shotgun. When Rob was moving out of the house, Brenda did not give him the weapon. During a search of Andrew's home, the shotgun was strangely not found. Meanwhile, an inspection at Gigstad's neighbor's house yielded an unexpected result. A fired shell casing from the shotgun they were looking for was found on the bedroom floor, and several .22 caliber bullets were found in the attic of the Gigstad family home. At the time of the crime, the Gigstad couple was not home. No signs of forced entry were established. Mrs. Gigstad admitted that the spare key to their home was in Brenda Andrews' possession. Another piece of evidence came from Joanna Larson, Pavitt's daughter. On the day of the crime, the girl lent her father her car. He promised to get it repaired. However, when James returned the vehicle, the daughter realized that he did not fix it. In addition, Joanna found a strange find on the car mat, a bullet of .22 caliber. To top it all off, the girl admitted that her father told her to throw it away when she informed him about it. Investigators also discovered that James had purchased a handgun the week before the attack. Consequently, detectives planned to question the Sweet couple. The last ride. On November 23rd, Robert Andrews' funeral was held. This crime raised many questions among family and friends. However, even more perplexity arose when Brenda and her children did not appear at the ceremony. Also, James Pavitt did not show up to say goodbye to his friend. No one present knew where they were. This worried not only Robert's relatives, but also the police. It became obvious that the no-shows had gone on the run. Apparently, they guessed that the officers were on the trail of the perpetrators. The suspects were identified. By then, the autopsy results had come back. Brenda's description of the attack differed significantly from the forensic report. As the police had suspected, 2 different weapons were used in the attack. Robert and Brenda were wounded differently than the dead man's wife described. The first shot at the man was indeed fired from a shotgun at long range, but the second came at close range from a .22 caliber pistol. Brenda's arm itself was also shot at close range with the same gun. By analyzing the bloodstains found and their location on the fabric, it was clear that the spouse was in the vicinity of the husband when he was shot. The angle of the blood matches where the shooter was. That is, it was Brenda who fired the second shot at the wounded Robert. After receiving the results of the examination, Brenda and James were officially recognized as suspects and declared wanted. On the run. Unfortunately, the fugitives were days ahead of police. Authorities alerted border officials that the suspects may have crossed the border.
However, they were nowhere to be seen. After a while, it became clear that James and Brenda had fled the country. Police speculated that they were in Mexico. To catch the criminals, it was decided to block their accounts. Without their livelihood, they would sooner or later make themselves known, and so they did. 3 months later, Pavitt contacted his daughter. He asked her to send the money.
Only one thing the man didn't take into account. The girl was cooperating with the investigation. Joanna had no doubts about her father's involvement in the crime. He was clearly hiding something from her. Even that time when he asked her boyfriend to call Mr. Andrew, pretending to be a doctor at the local hospital and report his wife's illness. Thanks to James's call, the investigation became aware that the perpetrators were hiding in the city of Cancun. In February 2002, James Pavitt and Brenda Andrew were apprehended at the border and handed over to the U.S. authorities. The two were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. Meanwhile, the Andrew couple's children were placed in the care of their paternal grandparents. After their arrest, none of the defendants were willing to cooperate with the investigation. They did not plead guilty, talking in the presence of lawyers. Trials. The first to stand before the court was James. The prosecution carefully built a case. It was reported that in the past, Pavitt was an Army sniper and knew how to handle firearms. His scandalous affair and attempts to prevent Rob Andrew from stripping Brenda of her beneficiary status were also voiced. His daughter's testimony and the physical evidence that was found were taken into account. The jury found James Pavitt guilty and sentenced him to death. Next to go on trial was Brenda Andrew. While James's trial was methodical, building up into a clear portrait of motives, means, and execution, Brenda's trial was full of sordid details, revelations, and intrigue. The prosecution brought Brenda's personality and her string of infidelities to the forefront. Her former lovers were invited to the hearing. They characterized the woman as a person of far from faith and integrity. When the prosecutor asked Brenda why she killed her husband, she replied, "God knows that in my heart I am pure and innocent. If you are people of faith, set me free." The prosecutor disagreed. He presented her as a lecherous woman who did not love her husband, cheated on him, and then killed him for selfish purposes. To prove his point, he showed the contents of a suitcase she had taken with her to Mexico. It contained lacy lingerie as well as the book 203 Ways to Drive a Man Crazy in Bed. Would a grieving widow run away from her husband's funeral? The prosecutor asked the defendant. In turn, the defense team tried to portray Brenda as a victim of what happened. The defense attorney recalled that she was also injured in the attack. However, forensic experts said that the woman shot herself in the arm, to which the defense said that it possessed a letter with Pavitt's sole confession to the crimes committed. That would seem to be a valid argument. However, the handwriting expertise established that the document was forged by Brenda Andrew herself. However, the most shocking revelation was another. Pavitt's attorney stated that in the event of his ward's death, Brenda became the beneficiary of his insurance policy. In time, apparently, the same fate awaited him as Rob. Or maybe Brenda thought that she would be able to prove her innocence, and the punishment for the crime would fall on the shoulders of her lover. After the latter's death sentence, she'd be entitled to the insurance money too. The jury deliberated for about 6 hours. In the end, Brenda Andrew was found guilty of the crime charged and sentenced to death.
Bottom line, both convicts are on death row awaiting execution. Brenda repeatedly appeals the judgment, but is unsuccessful. Pavitt's execution is scheduled for July 2024. It may be rescheduled again, as it has been done 4 times before. Brenda's execution date has not yet been set. She is the only woman sentenced to capital punishment in Oklahoma. The criminal intent of Brenda and James is horrific in and of itself. However, the fact that these men considered themselves God-fearing, teaching morality to children, further clouds the situation. People who preach things that do not guide their personal lives are unscrupulous and ruthless. You can expect anything from them because they are unfamiliar with moral principles